Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Lights, Camera, Accolade. We are meeting to discuss the 8th year of the Oscars, where we're getting close to being out of the 30s. And by close, I mean exactly halfway, since these were
I like that.
1935.
Glass half full. Good optimism.
Yeah, glass half full.
Good outlook.
I'm Sarah.
I'm Jake.
And I'm Chrysantha.
And we had a lot of movies to watch. We're starting to come out of the Great Depression, I think, at this point.
The first round of it. Yeah.
First round of it. Obviously, abroad in Europe, things are just getting worse. And then apparently there was a lot of German pressure starting to appear in Hollywood to avoid any kind of like anti-Nazi, anti-fascist sentiment. So some studios, some people bended to that more than others. But I found out that someone that we know was pretty instrumental in pressuring Hollywood to not make anti-Nazi movies. And do you guys want to know who it was?
Is it Norma and Irving Thalberg? Who was it?
No, it's no one that we love. It's no one that we love.
Is it Wallace?
It was... Okay, it wasn't an actor, was not an actor, but it was William Hayes, the person, obviously, who pushed the Hayes Code on Hollywood. So, of course.
Wow.
So,
strange bedfellows we're making in the fight against fascism. This goes to show you.
No. He was pro-fascist.
Oh, you're saying we should censor, we should not talk about Nazis?
Yep.
Oh, fuck him. Fuck him.
Exactly. He was like, we should have married couples sleeping in separate beds, very clear good versus evil, except when it comes to Nazis, who we don't know where we stand on that yet. So let's not make any anti-Nazi movies.
Wow.
And yep.
Well, as many listeners with even, marginal knowledge of that time period may know, unfortunately, there was a lot of Nazi sympathy in the United States and other parts of Europe in the 30s before things really started to escalate. I mean, famously, there's a lot of multinational companies that did business happily with the Nazis as they were starting to round people up and create ghettos. So it just goes to show you, for some people, including apparently Mr. Hayes, the profit margin is more important than humanity. But I guess that's not a surprise.
Not a surprise. But when I saw his name, I was like, of course, the man who ruined movies would like double down on this.
Well, thank you for that, Sarah. And on a more positive note, I just want to mention before we dive into the actual movies, how I was struck by just how much more technologically advanced they're getting, even from the several years ago we started. Technological and cinematic advancement was like leaps and bounds from year to year during this time period. And it's so cool to see it in real time.
And I think this year, and we'll probably get into this a little bit more, but last episode we mentioned with film editing, we were still a little let down where there didn't seem to be much in the way of like, I don't know, tightening up of some of the movies, some more so than others.
Year,
last year. But this year I feel like, I don't know, it's starting to make a difference, I assume.
Yeah, I'm glad we all felt that.
All right, any other thoughts before we jump into the nominees?
No, ma'am.
I'm ready to dig in.
All right. So as listeners may have noticed, Abby is not joining us today. So I have to take care of the summaries for these movies. She always does a fantastic job at somehow being like short and sweet and funny and to the point and makes you think about certain aspects of the film thematically in like 3 sentences or less. Keep your expectations low for me.
You got this, Captain. Everyone, you got it.
Just bear with me. We'll try.
It's a good thing I didn't do it because every summary would have been 5 minutes long. So I'm glad you jumped on this grenade.
I was like, I've got to do it. Otherwise, the episode will end up being 6 hours long. We can't do this.
We all have our strengths. Brevity is not mine.
Yes. Okay, so let me see. Our first movie of the year, and a reminder to listeners that we watched these chronologically in order of release. So this was the first one, The Lives of a Bengal Lancer. It's an action-adventure drama based on the autobiography of British soldier Francis Yates Brown. Ultimately, the story has little in common with its source material and instead is basically a recruitment ad disguised as a buddy war movie. It centers around 3 officers, Gary Cooper as Lieutenant Alan McGregor, a gruff but dependable sentinel with a heart of gold, Franchot Tone as Lieutenant John Forsyth, a wisecracking cynic, and Richard Cromwell as Donald Stone, an eager newbie ostensibly joined just to get closer to his emotionally distant father, who happens to be their commanding officer. In this movie, the three bond over polo, badly played instruments, and daddy issues while holding the fort in colonial India. Tensions eventually escalate with the local rebel warlord fighting for Bengal's independence from the British, so of course he's the bad guy in this, Muhammad Khan, and the trio finds themselves on the front lines of colonial politics. Stone's desire to impress his dad ultimately lead him to being captured, which forces Forsyth and McGregor into an unsuccessful rescue. They all end up jailed and tortured. The climax features an explosive jailbreak, a cavalry charge, and the valiant and literal self-sacrifice of Lieutenant McGregor, but he'd be happy to know that at least Stone finally got his dad's approval.
Great. Good job.
Everyone clap.
I'm clapping. You can't see it, but I'm clapping. I always love these because, like, I take my notes from movies, but until I hear the summary, my brain doesn't really kick into gear, and now I'm visualizing the whole thing. It's like I'm reliving the movie right now. So thank you for that.
I'm sorry that you're reliving this movie because I'm gonna be honest, this one took me 4 days to try to get through because I kept falling asleep in the middle of it, and it was kind of rough. And that's not to say I think Gary Cooper did a good job. Like, I enjoyed his performance, but I just, for 3/4 of the movie, I just kept being like, why am I watching this? Like, I don't, what's going on?
Well, I'm glad I watched it with Chrysantha because we got through it together. We held tight together and cracked jokes the whole time. But I do agree. It's funny we're starting with this one. It was probably my least favorite this year.
It's so bad.
Yeah, same goes for me. Kind of makes me wonder why it was nominated because I felt like the others were better.
It was kind of similar to last year where there were certain movies where I was like, they're nominating too many movies and there's a big difference in quality between some of these. This was absolutely one of those for me, and it just sucks that it was the first one we watched. But at the same time, it's like it's setting such a low bar
go up from
that
here.
You're like, okay, exactly.
Yes, yeah,
can only get better. I did find out, though, little bit of trivia, that it was supposed to be made in 1931, and they had gone to India and did location shooting and everything, but the heat destroyed the film. And I think that was a sign that they should have not made this movie, but they persisted and they eventually filmed it in like the hills surrounding Los Angeles in 1935, so we could get to see it. Yay.
And then complain about it.
Yeah,
people must have had such a warped view of like what the world looks like now in retrospect, knowing like how many films were just filmed in the greater Los Angeles, San Bernardino region. Like, but I guess it was very convenient for Hollywood and cheap.
At least it's not like a Trader Horn type situation where
that's the other extreme.
Doing all that. Exactly. And this one kind of got me too, though, because some of the scenes I was like, at least those rocks look cool. I wonder where they filmed this.
Oh, that's true. With the little gun battle. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say just a couple of positive things to say about this movie. I did like some of the action sequences, like that gun battle, and like the climactic scene is actually pretty cool. And I commented to Chrysantha while watching it. I think the way Gary Cooper holds that machine gun as they're coming out of the barn and like unloading on everybody was one of the coolest ways I've ever seen somebody hold a machine gun. And it really stuck with me, like the visual of that, because he's a tall guy and he's got this gun. And he's like holding it upright, almost like a one would hold a boom mic. And it was pretty badass. I won't lie. But, yeah, the movie's kind of, to me, it struck me as like a dramatic, so not really funny at all version of that Dudes Rock movie from last year. Except there were no women, total sausage fest. And the thing is, when you're making that point about self-sacrifice and putting the greater good ahead of your own well-being or even your close loved ones' well-being, I get that and I'm on board for it. And it's kind of refreshing to see, but it's got to be for a good cause, not for perpetuating the colonial dominance of India for England.
Yep.
Yeah, I will say, like, knowing that it was supposed to be filmed in 1931, I guess it kind of makes sense because when we were watching it, like, it just felt like it didn't fit in. Like once I watched all the other movies, and then when I kind of looked back at this one, the structure, a little bit of the acting, the delivery, and some of the lines, it did feel more
like dated.
Stagnant. Yes, that's a better way to put it. Dated than the other films, because definitely, like what Jake said, with a lot of the other stuff, and you'll hear about it when we talk about it, there were significant improvements in like just acting in general, special effects, camera work, and just overall even story too, writing, I guess, of the script. And yeah, this Lives of a Bengal Dancer, or Bengal Lancer did not.
Bengal Dancer would probably
have been more interesting. Honestly. I'm very curious.
Fit the theme
like
too.
Belly dancing.
Yeah.
I'm just picturing Gary Cooper with a little hulu on belly dancing.
But yeah, it just didn't really fit in.
One thing that I think it might be because this was something that I've been paying attention to, trying not to let, like, I don't know, my modern sensibilities just treat this as normal, is music. So this one lacked a score. So there was
that's true.
it was mostly just silent with obviously the dialogue and whatever battle sound effects, but they didn't really have any music, whether to set the scene or transition a scene or just as like a score of any kind. So I was like, I think that's also why this one feels just much more like dry compared to other ones that we watched this year, where it's becoming much more common to actually use music to, affect how people feel about things. So
we have a whole new appreciation for music now after movies like this. It's so important to,
it really is. Yeah, it's surprising.
Telling the audience what to feel, because sometimes we need that.
Yeah, sometimes we don't know.
I didn't know who to root for in this one. Definitely felt like Muhammad Khan probably would have been the good guy, but that's not the way the movie presented it.
Yeah, the only music was Forsyth playing that really annoying instrument.
Oh, yeah.
Or playing that instrument really annoyingly, I should say, in multiple scenes. And I was like, in the scene where the snake gets drawn to him playing the instrument, I was like, please kill this man. I was like, let it be done with him.
Make it stop.
Exactly, make it stop.
Yeah, he was probably doing it wrong, very whitely.
Yeah, I think that's what the screenplay says. Plays instrument whitely.
Very white of you, Forsyth.
Okay, well, I'm ready to move on.
Definitely.
I'm ready to put this film behind us because
there's much better movies this year, so let's get to them.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if David Copperfield is one of them.
I don't know either. Yeah, exactly. Tough start to 1935. Okay. David Copperfield is a mostly faithful adaptation of Charles Dickens' coming-of-age rags-to-riches saga starring Freddie Bartholomew as child David and Frank Laughton as grown David. We follow his story from birth to young adulthood as he experiences the full spectrum of Victorian injustice, including boarding school, a cruel stepfather, being orphaned, child labor in a bottling factory, until he finally runs away to seek the help of his eccentric Aunt Betsy, who ultimately takes him in. Despite touching briefly on some of those darker themes, it's mostly just a coming-of-age morality tale where every hardship is just another stepping stone toward character building and an eventual happy ending where everyone gets what they deserve except for David's first wife, Dora.
Yeah, poor Dora.
Dang.
Literally, okay, Dora, her whole character just bothered me from the start. Like, she was obviously just meant to be too innocent for this world, but she was just kind of an annoying mess, and then she died from being annoying. Like, this it's just terrible.
There's one thing to say that a character's a little ditzy, but she was like a child, basically.
Truly sexy baby. Like,
yeah, I'm sad that Abby's not here.
Empty.
That's one of her favorite concepts.
I know. I did find out, though, that the actress who played Dora, Maureen O'Sullivan, she's Mia Farrow's mom.
Wow.
Yeah. All of the Farrows. Yeah.
There's Mia, there's Ronan. He's a very renowned journalist.
That was probably common back then, because I mean, the same thing with the Barrymores. I mean, they got their claim to fame in the 30s, and then they have their own, essentially, like, I guess, kind of successful dynasty. I don't know. I feel like Drew Barrymore was the one that kind of like, she's carrying that on her back a bit.
Charlie's Angels was pretty much the high point of that family's 100-year acting dynasty.
Yeah, it is cool to see the beginning of many of these dynasties, though.
Yeah. Well, to talk about this movie itself, I liked...
Yeah, other than Dora.
I liked the first half a lot more than the second half, because child David I thought was very cute. I wrote down, he said, "It's all so delightful." I think he said it a few times. And like when he delivered it, I was like, this kid needs to be in some kind of commercial today because this kid is adorable.
Yeah, he was cute.
But as soon as he grew up and became Joey from Cavalcade, which I don't know if you guys noticed, it was that actor.
Yes.
I was like,
so annoying.
I no longer was feeling sympathy for him. He seemed to have blinders on. It was like, this girl, Agnes, was perfect for him. He couldn't see it. He had to get with Dora. And it was like,
oh no.
It was just not as fun as the first half. That said, the first half is rough because poor David, his father passes away right before he's born. And he has this kind of idyllic childhood with his mother and with his very dedicated and loyal maid, because they're kind of in the upper class. But as soon as he's maybe like 6 or 7, his mom marries this really snooty, mean guy. And then he kind of ices out David. He's left to live up in the attic. And eventually his mom gets pregnant by the new husband, but she dies in childbirth. And it's so traumatic. And David gets sent away. And I don't know, that whole storyline I felt was pretty affecting. I mean, if anybody's a child of divorce and stuff, when your parent starts dating new people when you're a little kid, it's kind of, you get a little territorial or concerned. So it was stimulating some like old school memories there. But this was like the nightmare scenario of that. So that part of the story was interesting.
I think like a lot of Dickens stuff, sometimes it feels like it just spends too long hammering the same points in over and over. So I didn't dislike this, but it's not something that really stood out to me. I will say that I loved David's aunt, played by Edna Mae Oliver. Like, I think she did a fantastic job. She got some good laughs out of me. Just very eccentric, very strange woman.
I think she was in one or two other things.
Really loved her.
I'm not positive which.
Definitely saw her. I think she was in Cimarron, but I think in that she played one of the like annoying townspeople or something. But I think that's what I remember her from.
I enjoyed the way every time someone she didn't recognize walked by her house, her and her maidservant went out and beat them. That was kind of cool. It was pretty hardcore, actually.
She's goals. I don't know.
But it did feel like it felt like so many scenes of people just introducing themselves again. And I don't know if it was just me or like there's so much of this like, oh, it's so good to see you. Yes, it's been so long. Da da da. It's just it got to feel very like you're saying, making the same points, doing the same thing over and over. So by the end of the movie, it starts to wear on you. But little shout out to W.C. Fields. He did have a pretty entertaining character. He was one of David's father figures, a recurring figure throughout his life. He's kind of a ne'er-do-well, drunken, oversized leprechaun-looking guy who starts off as kind of totally a loser, but by the end of the movie, he kind of finds his place as a lawyer again and kind of helps David to uncover this swindle that's being carried out against this family he's grown very close to. So that was good characters. First time we've seen WC, and I thought I love the way he ends so many of his phrases with "in short," and then he'll make whatever his point is. So he had a very kind of dramatic and histrionic way of speaking that was cool.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about David Copperfield before we move on?
Oh man.
Nope.
All right. Next, we have a little bit of a change of pace. We watched Naughty Marietta, which stars Jeanette MacDonald as Princess Marie de Namur de la Boffa, otherwise known under the false name Marietta Franini. She escapes her royal duties to a loveless arranged marriage to instead flee to New Orleans as part of a ship full of women sent specifically to marry colonists for morale, which I guess was a thing that they did. Pirates end up attacking the ship, but the women are saved by mercenaries led by the dashing Captain Richard Warrington, played by Nelson Eddy. After a series of misadventures and romantic misunderstandings navigated mostly through song and dance, they begin to fall for each other. And just as Marietta's true identity as a French princess is revealed, she's ordered to return to France. So in a final act of defiance against her arranged royal fate, she ultimately chooses love over duty, and the two escape together to start a new life in the new world.
I just want to say, listeners, I know I've been skeptical about musicals so far, and in particular, we were very harsh on that opera-oriented movie from either last year or the year before.
Last year,
which was warranted. That movie kind of sucked ass. But this one was operatic, and I really liked it. I really liked this movie. I thought it was very funny. I thought the music was integrated into what was happening in a very sensible way. And I like the way the princess, aka Marietta, and the dashing gentleman you mentioned, their love is kind of their connective tissue through that is through their shared musical ability. And it's not really until they reveal to each other that they're both coincidentally like opera singers out here in New Orleans randomly that they truly fall in love. And I don't know. I just I thought it was funny. I thought it moved pretty quickly. And that scene with the marionettes, I don't know if anybody millennial age will remember. I think on Nickelodeon and Pee Wee Herman and stuff when we were little, you'd have the person put their head through like a screen in the wall and then like a little body underneath the head doing hand motions and stuff. They do that in this movie, and I thought it was hilarious.
It did make me laugh because with musicals, a lot of the time you're like, okay, is this a musical where the song and dance is actually happening in real life, or is this like fantastical? This one initially I couldn't really tell because like when they leave to New Orleans on the ship, she's singing, everyone's singing, and like the crowd is just like, nice, this song is so good. But then literally when the pirates they hear the mercenaries singing, and that's when they try and like be like, oh no, the mercenaries are here. So I was like, are they like chanting maybe? But as soon as he starts singing and Jeanette MacDonald like looks at him like, oh, he can sing. I was like, oh, okay, so this is a world where they're literally singing everything that we're actually seeing, which seems so ridiculous because again, it is more of an operatic style. So to have this set in colonial New Orleans was just really funny to me.
That's a good call out because I kind of went through the same thought process when I was watching the movie, like the opening too. Like I was like, okay, it's a musical. It's hard because sometimes like with musicals you have to rely on the lyrics, and since a lot of the songs in this were operatic, I was like hard. Yes, I was like, what the hell is she singing about?
But I could hear like maybe 75% of the lyrics in this. I was
gonna say 30%.
Yeah, I was gonna say
but in comparison to the other opera movie, which I didn't understand any of it, I was getting a lot more this time, which I appreciate.
Yeah, because those were not in English. But I don't know if you guys remember Jeanette MacDonald, but she was in The Love Parade and 1 Hour with You. Yeah. So I just really like her as an actress. Yeah.
Her smile is fantastic.
Great smile, great singing voice. Obviously, I associate her with Maurice Chevalier, though. So initially, when this started and we got introduced to the love interest, I was like, man, I miss Maurice. This should have been another Maurice Jeanette MacDonald movie. But ultimately, I feel like the character was definitely more fitting for like Nelson Eddy, because a little bit more rugged rather than, charming and French.
Sarah, did you see that Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy had a lifelong love affair between the two of them?
Yes. Very and I think, okay, so I didn't immediately realize that it was Nelson Eddy, but I don't know if you guys remember, but I mentioned, I think it was in the episode where we watched 1 Hour with You, when I'd done a little bit of research on her. She was the one that I brought up where Louis B. Mayer and MGM made her marry, I forget the actor's name, but made her marry to essentially cover the fact that he was gay, and would not allow her to get a divorce or have her marriage annulled. So she had that lifelong love with Nelson Eddy, but it could never be public or legitimized official, because she was contracted to stay in that marriage. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, that's so interesting that you found out that the husband was gay, because when I was researching it, it talked around that, and it called him impotent instead, and it insinuated, it said after their honeymoon, Jeanette said something along the lines of, there's never gonna be children in this marriage. So I wasn't sure what that meant, but I guess at that time you couldn't explicitly say that he was just not heterosexual.
Right.
But I did think it was sad. She had 8 miscarriages with Nelson Eddy, and
That's wow.
I read that at her funeral, Nelson Eddy was the last guy to leave the building. It really seemed like the repression of that era kept 2 people who really did love each other from being able to do it openly. That's sad.
Right.
But at least they got to live out their love in the movie, and they did a number of movies together.
That's true.
Yeah, I was reading that I think they did a mock wedding when they were filming one movie called Rosemary. So it's kind of cool. Like in reality, they couldn't be together, but on the film, so you can always go back in those movies that they were in together and just see that chemistry is real.
Very bittersweet.
Yeah. A couple of things just want to mention. The governor, who I thought was very funny in this, he plays the Wizard of Oz in a few years. So something to keep in mind.
I'm really looking forward to the Wizard of Oz year in general. There are a lot of really good movies.
Technological revolution when we get there. I'm really I'm going to have a whole new appreciation for it now. But I love the scene where you see the colonists in New Orleans kind of fighting and they're unhappy and everything. And then the boat lets off the women and they're all like, oh, they're so excited. And they bring them to the convent. And it's almost like a dating mixer where the colonists are trying to impress the ladies. And then the one guy who's just going around lifting up their arms and feeling like which is going to be the strongest, help him like work the land the best. So there's a lot of just kind of casual, funny comedy in this. And, also, probably pretty good that the princess went to New Orleans at this time, because if she had stayed in France, she probably would have gotten her head cut off in a few years based on the timeline of this. So good for her. French Revolution incoming.
Yep, which will come up again in one of our other movies, but not the next one. Which, are we ready to move on to Ruggles of Red Gap?
Yep.
Okay. So, first of all, not a Sesame Street type movie. It is actually a quirky fish out of water comedy, which was based on a novel by Harry Leon Wilson that follows the transformation of a refined English butler named Marmaduke Ruggles into a Western man of the world through the power of American exceptionalism. Ruggles is played by Charles Laughton, who we last saw as the menacing, overbearing father in Barrett's of Wimple Street. And although Ruggles is initially in the service of a wealthy Englishman in Paris, he's lost in a high-stakes poker game to a new money American prospector, Egbert Floud, played by Roland Young. Ruggles is forced to move with them back to the wild frontier town of Red Gap, Washington, where he struggles to adapt to the Wild West lifestyle, which mostly includes a lot of cowboy hats and a lot of public intoxication. He slowly discovers that the American dream means even a gentleman's gentleman can reinvent himself and chart their own course. Despite being given the opportunity to return to the life he knew when his former employer offers him his job back, he decides to stay in Red Gap, where he's found a family, opened a restaurant, and become a self-made man.
Boy, did he. I'll tell you, this movie made me proud to be an American. And that is, I so rarely have occasion to say that these days, but Ruggles knew us better than ourselves, and it's epitomized in that scene. So as you said there, he gets transferred over to the United States over the course of the movie. And there's this conniving brother-in-law that wants to get him fired because he feels he's undermining him. So he gets fired. And he's despondent in this tavern. And Ruggles is kind of down in the dumps. He doesn't know what to do next. And then he realizes, maybe this is an opportunity for him to branch out and make something for himself, as you say. And in that moment, his friend, his employer, Egbert, says, this is just like what Lincoln said at Gettysburg. Hey, isn't it, guys? Does anybody remember what Lincoln said at Gettysburg? And after they comedically go around the room and everybody, the half-drunk people and the regular people, can't quite remember, what is it that Lincoln said and what does make us American here? Ruggles, who is, as you say, a very intelligent gentleman and has been doing his due diligence and reading about American history, recounts from heart the Gettysburg Address, and it draws everybody to a silence all around him. It's very solemn. And by the end of it, you're just like, damn, there was a good kernel of an idea in this country, at one point. So I just thank you, Ruggles, for making me feel that way about America.
Yeah, that scene was so well delivered by Charles Laughton. And he apparently, while filming, became very emotional during that scene. And so it took them, I think, like a day and a half to actually shoot the entire thing because Charles Laughton was just so moved by that speech and by everything going on to the character at that point and putting things in perspective. I think I read he even considered becoming an American citizen after this whole experience. Ultimately, I don't believe he did, but it was very much for him a very important scene that he regarded as like one of the best that he had done. And it is very good, very moving. Because of modern feelings, right? I was of two minds, right? There was part of me that was like, oh, like I am being affected by this, but it feels a little bit like, isn't America great propaganda at a time where currently there's, not much to be proud of. And even at that time, plenty of things to not be proud of. But, and I think this came up briefly in our last episode, but for contemporary audiences with like the New Deal and other things that were starting to really help people feel like things were turning into a positive direction, that this sort of thing was born out of potentially a genuine love for kind of the struggles that the country had been through and was starting to move out of together. So I was like, okay, it's just hard for me to fully separate current, feelings about the country versus what it was like at that time.
I respect that, and it's a good point to make.
It's still a very good scene.
You're so right. I mean, in the 1930s, our modern national identity is being formed, and I kind of feel like that scene is a very small part of that process, and it was cool. But we're kind of dragging out a discussion about probably the most solemn and serious part of the movie, and what is otherwise, to my mind, a very funny movie, mostly due to these great cast of characters with really good accents and voices. This is like a who's who of character actors just going over the top, trying to eat each other's lunch and scene steal the entire time. And it combines together in a way that's really good, because I laughed throughout this. Some of the characters that stick out is Egbert's wife, who's the one who really wants to get an English servant because they're kind of nouveau rich and putting on airs. And every time she talks, she drags out certain words. One sticks out. She's like, Egbert, you'll do as you're told. And it's so just bleeding that like inauthentic kind of, like I say, nouveau rich. And I appreciated that. But
is that the exchange also where she says that and then Ruggles is like, indubitably, and she's like, oh, what wonderful French.
Oh yeah, that was great. So it tells you she's not really an aristocrat here. She is trying to emulate one, which is so American, I think, in the eyes of the British at that time. Right, who are these newcomers on the scene? Yeah, their family kind of gave me kind of like a Beverly Hillbillies vibe. Definitely a lot of energy and hijinks for sure. I love Ruggles' facial expressions throughout the movie. He just has, it's almost like Jim from The Office. All this crazy stuff is going on. And the camera will cut to him and he's like, how did I get myself into this kind of thing? Yeah, like not quite eye rolling, but kind of just like very judgmental, but staying polite. Fantastic. To me, it feels like every year there's like an MVP to some extent. Like last year, it was definitely Big Eyes. Claudette Colbert, who was fantastic. Cleopatra is probably my favorite thing for her. But this year, I think it's Charles Laughton. And now having seen him in so many things, his range is really, really impressive as an actor. Even his range just in this movie, because like you're saying, he's kind of initially the softly judgmental, but very like high-strung, refined butler, and then he has his sequences where he is very uncomfortable with everything that Egbert and his friend are doing to draw attention to themselves in very like uncouth ultimately, but then when he gets drunk, all of his facial expressions and the way that he acted throughout all of that, and then eventually as he kind of truly starts coming out of his shell and meeting people in the town and connecting with them, and you have that really solemn Gettysburg Address that is obviously so moving to him, and then just kind of becoming more of a normal person who's trying to do something for himself. That all leads to when everyone's like singing for him at the end of the movie, that he's like a jolly good fellow, and he just gets like teary with a small smile and everything. I was just like, the range in this movie alone, he went through such, different
transformations at different points. So he's very, very good as an actor, and especially in this, I think.
You're so right to bring up that scene because I was pumping my fist by the end of this movie for Ruggles. He got the girl, he got his business, he threw that guy who was always trying to sabotage him out to everyone's cheering. It was a real feel good ending. And I love this one. I would really recommend this movie to anybody interested in recommendations as we move through here, and especially if you want to get a tour de force for Mr. Laughton. As we're saying, this is, to my mind, one of his best things so far.
Yeah. Are we ready to move on to our next movie?
Yes, Cap.
All right. Les Miserables, which I'm going to refer to as Les Mis for the rest of this discussion because it's just one that's just hard to pronounce. The movie condenses Victor Hugo's epic brick-like novel into a more digestible serving of French Revolution and redemption. The story centers around Jean Valjean, played by Frederick Mark, who we also last saw in Barretts of Wimpole Street. Valjean is an ex-convict who served 19 years for stealing a loaf of bread to try to feed his hungry family. Because society offers nothing but further judgment and scorn to ex-convicts, Valjean is unable to make an honest life for himself and ends up stealing silver tableware from a bishop who was the only one to offer him shelter in the early days following his release from the galleys. He is quickly apprehended by police, but when they bring him back to the bishop, expecting confirmation that he is indeed a thief, the bishop instead covers for Valjean and states that not only was it a gift, that he also forgot to take a pair of silver candlesticks. This single act of kindness is a transformative event for Valjean as he vows to move forward with a strong moral compass, 2 silver candlesticks, and a fake identity as he breaks parole and reinvents himself in a new town as a factory owner. When one of Valjean's workers, Fantine, is fired, unbeknownst to him, and dies in misery, he vows to care for her daughter Cosette. His peaceful life is threatened by the unyielding Inspector Javert, played by Charles Laughton, who we last saw as Ruggles in Ruggles of Red Gap, and before that in Barretts of Wimpole Street.
It's all over.
Javert is more obsessed with the letter of the law than with human mercy. He catches on to Valjean's true identity, but is briefly thrown off the trail when someone else is arrested, allegedly identified as Valjean. The real Valjean can't in good conscience let an innocent man take his place in the galleys, so he outs himself but manages to escape the city with Cosette before they can be caught. Cosette is then taken in by a convent. She grows up as France bruised with revolution and young idealists. This adaptation is not a musical, so while you do not hear the people singing the song of angry men, it delivers plenty of solid moments, largely centered around March's Valjean and Laughton's Javert, who finally realizes that mercy is stronger than law, an epiphany that drives him to suicide, while Valjean disappears into a self-imposed exile, haunted but free.
Yeah. Funnily enough, I had never seen Les Mis like all the way through before. I know I tried to watch the musical a number of years ago and I was kind of in and out. So it was good to see the entirety of the story and get the message of it. And it's a powerful one. It's a good metaphor for that point in French history as it's transitioning out of monarchy into this more bourgeois society about personal liberty and freedom. And I love the message of the movie. Life is to give, not to take. And that lesson that the bishop that you so greatly described that he imparts on Jean Valjean is so transformative. It was good. I need to think a little. Sorry.
There was part of me that was definitely humming some of the songs where I'm like, man, musical sequence here would really elevate this to the next level.
Now.
But no, it's just very good. And this was one that was, required high school reading for me, but it's been a long time since I've read the amount that I read of that book. But I don't know. It's a good story. And I think the arc that both Valjean go through and Javert are the most compelling things for me. In book, in this movie, in musical, I'm not really interested in Cosette and Marius, like everything kind of going on with that.
Yeah.
But I just really don't care about their story as much as I do Valjean and Javert personally.
Yeah, I mean, I was going into this thinking it was going to be a musical because the only, I guess, rendition of the film that I had heard about was the most recent one, which was back in 16 or something. Yeah, with Russell Crowe.
I think it was apparently 2012.
Jeez, we're getting old.
Oh, shoot. That's, wow. Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, that's the only one I knew about. And I heard it was good. I never went to go watch it. And so this was definitely one that I wanted. I was very like curious to watch, and it did not disappoint. Like, I loved the story. I thought the message was good. And since I didn't have a background or anything, I didn't really know anything about the plot of this movie. Are we supposed to know more about Cosette? Is she supposed to have like a bigger role? Because I felt like it was more for character development, or more of like an exploration of character of Jean Valjean. Just to show, like, I guess that he was always inherently a good man despite having gone through that injustice, and then having that like complete, well, I don't even want to say that Inspector Javert was bad. He was just
compromising.
Yes, yeah, he was just more strict, and he was very by the book, and so
yeah, and he held himself to the same standards because he was just like, no, the law knows better than us.
The reason why he was a good character is, and the movie probably doesn't do it as much as the book did, but it talks about how he came up from nothing and he was born into like extreme poverty and dysfunction. And I think that this gets lost a little bit in the movie too, because they make a change that I was going to mention from the original source material. But I think, not to bring up Napoleon again, but he and that era of France represented the introduction of meritocracy into a society that was very hereditary before that. And you have this guy, Jafar, who came from nothing, who scrounged and scratched and took very seriously these new kind of revolutionary ideals of the law and the Enlightenment and, you know, what's right is right and wrong is wrong. And the brutality in a lot of ways of the revolution is tempered against Jean Valjean, which is kind of what happened historically. But in any case, what I was referring to there is the movie starts in 1800, which is like at the height of Napoleonic, you know, power. Whereas in the actual source material, it starts in 1850 after Napoleon is defeated and the Bourbon monarchy comes back to power. All that to say, you can tell that British people had a big hand in making this movie because there's a little bit of anti-Napoleonic sentiment in it. But all to say, the revolution that takes place is the 1832 revolution, which finally kicked off, you know, the mainline Bourbons for a more kind of free society in 1832. So the actual story is from 1815 to 1832, but the movie would have you believe it's from 1800 to 1832. So I think that that helps for understanding Jafar's character because he was like very legalistic and Bonapartist and meritocratic, whereas Jean Valjean is like France going like, we're exhausted, you know, like let's get back to normal here. Let's refine some humanity. And that's kind of what happened in that revolution.
Yeah, so they made a few changes in this movie, one of which is probably tied to that shift in time and perhaps a shift in messaging that they were going for here. But the group that Marius is part of, in the original source material, they are like revolutionaries fighting for, you know, democracy, whatever else. But in the movie, they made a specific point to be like, oh, they're essentially wanting better conditions for men sent to the galleys and stuff.
Yeah.
Like it is a much smaller goal that they have. Not entirely sure why they shifted it to that, other than to potentially avoid more of the more like revolutionary type themes in there. Or it might just also be condensing it, right? Like might just be like, oh, this is simpler for storytelling because this is already very, very long. And they're not as important. Including with Fantine, like in the book, and this is shown in the musical as well. Her life after she gets fired is really rough. Like she's described initially as, you know, very beautiful with long, beautiful golden hair, etc. And she, you know, cuts off all her hair, sells it. She sells her teeth. She's like wasting away just trying to make a life where her daughter can survive. So it's much more impactful, obviously, for Valjean, who did not know that this happened like to one of his factory workers, and he who himself had served 19 years for stealing bread to try and feed his family. It's like, oh, this is basically what could have happened to me, and then takes Cosette in. So
yeah, that was so tragic, and I felt like they kind of glazed over that. It's like, come on, we got to get out of here, Cosette. And I was expecting her to be like, where's mommy? Where are we going to take her? They don't
exactly.
even
She was
really
like,
yeah, she did. She just forgot.
She was just like, "You're cool," and it's like, "What about your mom? Hello."
I was a little worried towards the end, the way he objected so much to her getting with Marius. It almost felt like it was a Barrett's of Wimple Street type vibe for a second, but I think it was more just the protective fatherly instinct. I think
protective fatherly, and to Chrysantha's point, right? Largely, she's in this story kind of just seems like a device that is his anchor and what he's making all of his decisions for, to ensure that she doesn't have to go through all of the horrors that the world has, you know? So I think his life has so revolved around keeping her safe that to lose that is to lose himself in a way. But eventually, you know, he lets her go. So
he remembers the motto, life is to give and not take.
Amen.
Yeah. It's so good.
Well, on a much less enlightened note, I just want to say Marius fumbled the ball bad, because his secretary, to me, much more attractive than the other girl.
I hated the way they killed her off like nothing. They didn't even care. I felt so bad. I was like, oh, poor girl.
Yeah, and this is just more reason why I'm kind of like, I don't know, Marius and Cosette kind of suck. I don't know. I don't like their story. I don't like anything with them. And then, yes, this made it worse in this adaptation for me, because I don't know if you guys noticed, but Cosette is played by, what's her name?
I recognized
Rochelle
her.
Hudson. Yeah. Did you recognize where she was from?
Not specifically, but I was like, I've seen this chick before.
She was in Imitation of Life as the daughter of Claudette Colbert, who falls in love with her boyfriend. So I was super annoyed with her in that movie. Yeah. So as soon as I saw her face in this movie, I was like, oh my God.
Doing the same shit again.
Yeah. Which I feel bad, because I'm like, okay, I shouldn't attribute, you know, any of that to the actress. And like, I'm sure she's good, but I just, that first role that we saw her in, she annoyed me so much that I was like, damn, that's like cemented in my brain now.
Or there's smoke, there's fire. The casting director's like, annoying young girl who puts herself before everyone else. We know who to call. Marius' secretary was a fox, and she deserved better. Call me. Even though you're dead. Better, you're probably 100
She
years
did.
Old, dead.
You said call me? All right. Are we ready to move on?
Yeah.
The Informer is a foggy morality tale of Jippo Nolan, played by Victor McLaglen, an Irishman who snitches on his former comrade and friend, Frankie, who has a bounty on his head for £20, which is the equivalent of about $2,000 in 2025 money. The film takes great care to not mention the IRA by name in order to avoid controversy, appease the censors, and appeal to the broadest possible audience, but we can guess what group they had been aligned with. Frankie ends up dead trying to escape capture, and Jippo's guilt weighs heavily on him as he wanders around the city trying to rid himself of the blood money he earned by being literally the most obviously guilty man anyone has ever seen. Eventually, he draws suspicion from his former unnamed revolutionary group, and they put him on trial, eventually confirming his guilt through his own confession. The woman he loves is shattered, tries to plead for his safety, promising that they'll escape and not cause further trouble, but rather than risk more information about their group leaking, they determine he has to be killed. A manhunt begins, and eventually they do fatally wound him, giving him just enough time to escape to a nearby church where Frankie's mother happens to be grieving. He confesses the truth to her before he dies, not as a traitor with a plan, but as a confused soul undone by desperation and a conscience that wouldn't stay quiet. It's part noir, part tragedy, and all atmospheric guilt trip where the real price of betrayal isn't money, but a man's own soul.
That was beautiful.
I'm crying tears. Oh my God.
I'm just saying. I mean, yeah, it was a good movie. Now I'm like, wow, that's a good movie.
Damn, was it a really good movie?
I feel like the synopsis that Sarah made the movie sound a lot better than it was, at least to me. Not saying that it's a horrible, like the lesson behind the story of the movie is good, but I just felt like
how did they no one catch on?
Long. Yeah, they took too long to catch on that he was the informer, and it's like he didn't do a good job at hiding it at all. Like he was wearing his guilt on his face, his forehead, and Yeah, I was just like, come on, guys. Like,
Yeah, that would definitely be my main complaint, is that I like the kind of story and the theme. And I think this is the one that had the title card referencing like Judas in the beginning. So obviously
Yeah.
like the whole blood money guilt being led to, your own downfall. I liked a lot about it. I liked how atmospheric it was. Like I said, kind of part noir. I think takes a lot of inspiration from German expressionism in the lighting and different things. Also, I'm pretty sure that scene where they do eventually put him on trial, like where they take him down into the basement and stuff, and it's a jury of his peers. That felt very much like it was ripped straight from M.
Right. That's what I was
So I
thinking.
was like, a little suspicious there. My main complaint, though, is just that, it takes way too long for it to start really coming back to him, because obviously the point is more to just watch him deteriorate. So we just see him go from scene to scene, getting more guilty, more drunk, more everything. But from a realistic standpoint, it's like, okay, you guys should have figured this out and taken this man out in 15 minutes in. Frankie dies, and then Jippo's like, I found this 20 pounds. Just don't worry, no relation. Yes, I was the last one who talked to Frankie. Don't worry. Nope, not guilty.
and then he goes to his wake and all the coins fall out and everyone's just looking at each other. No one says anything. It's like, you don't think that's odd? This very guilty man comes in, nobody knows really. And then he drops all this money and they're like, holy shit, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. More money than he's ever had.
And all his family and friends know that someone ratted him out.
Right.
And it's like, how can you not put the pieces together here?
Right. Especially when anytime anyone mentions anything vaguely related to money or to the cops or to Frankie or to like informing, even if they were like, oh, I was informed recently. He's like, informed by who? Like,
Who would ever do that?
yeah, exactly. So like I said, just the most obviously guilty man.
Y'all
But
protest too much.
when I was like writing the summary and thinking back, I was like, okay, if I try and take the realism aspect out of it, again, they really should have figured this out immediately, and just look at the movie as a little bit more abstract almost, then I like it more personally.
You guys are making a good point, and there is definitely a little bit of a suspension of disbelief there, but I just want to make the counterpoint, and I feel that I'm in a position to say this as someone who's quarter Irish. We are talking about the Irish here, and there's a reason why they were colonially dominated for so long, and I'm just kidding.
But also, are we talking about the Irish? Because that was another thing. Everyone obviously like had mostly appropriate accents, except the leader of the not IRA, who was like the most American sounding person.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that was a
I've ever
recurring
seen.
thing this year. But look, to take a counterpoint, just in terms of, and I'm not saying you guys didn't like the movie, but number one, the guy who played Jippo, the main character, won Best Actor this year. And I think
he
it's
was very
for a reason. And I feel like this was so ahead of its time because I like movies a little bit about fuck ups who are imperfect. And this guy, Jippo, he's not the most handsome guy. He's certainly not the brightest guy. He's really kind of a bad guy. And it almost like reminds me of like that Prestige era TV turn around Tony Soprano in the new millennium, where it was like, the anti-hero thing is pretty interesting to watch, whether you're watching it because you hate him or you sympathize with elements of what he's going through or just because it's entertaining. I felt like that was kind of innovative in terms of what we've seen so far, because a lot of times what we see in these movies in this era is very black and white. And here you have a guy that we're forced through this turbulent night with, seeing him make decisions left and right, and I was just pulling my hair out. Whether you're trying to think of how to help this guy get out of this, or you're just in disagreement with the course he's taken altogether from a moral standpoint, he just keeps fucking up over and over again. And for me, that was interesting to watch and a nice change of pace.
That's a good point. Yeah. And now that you make that connection to Tony Soprano, or like, I guess the anti-hero archetype, yeah, that's true. That is essentially what Jippo is. Yeah, I was so like frustrated seeing him deteriorate and kind of like, can't you see even the point when that man was like using him just for the money?
Hype man. I love that guy.
How, I was like so annoyed. I'm like, can't you see what he's doing?
I want that guy. This is my buddy Jippo. He's the greatest guy ever. Duh, come on, round of drinks. That dude had a good racket going. He's this little guy, Yoda-esque, but Irish. He's basically a leprechaun, another leprechaun type character, but turned out to be a real scumbag in the end.
Yeah, he's like, I will never be disloyal to you, Jippo. And then they're like, we're looking for Jippo. He might have turned Frankie. And he's like, he's over there. Like, he's right there.
But that was everybody. I think this did not speak for Irish. Well, I mean, I did like the IRA guys, naturally. Support the IRA personally. Sorry. But it was interesting, too, because I think we have very modern sensibilities in the sense that, like, in the United States, we haven't really had, like, an insurgency here since like Civil War era, really.
Yeah.
And it's like you kind of like at first I'm like, damn, they got to kill this guy Jippo. He's just kind of like this lumbering fool. But it's like, no, if the black and tans, the British catch him and they make him talk, that's potentially like 50, 60, 70 guys are going to get incarcerated or killed. So the stakes are high. It was interesting for that alone too. But for me, the thing that stood out the most from this movie is 20 minutes in, I was like, I get John Ford now. Because I don't know if you guys noticed some of the camera work and specifically stuff he was doing with lighting. It was miles ahead of, especially if we think about like the hands-off direction last year. Man, this movie was, you could see the director's hand pretty heavily, and I thought it was beautiful at times.
Yeah, that I definitely agree with. I think this is probably the best looking movie that we watched this year.
I agree.
But I think a lot of that is inspired by those earlier German Expressionist films. So that's just another thing that we've talked about, right? Where it's just like, damn, they were doing a lot of really interesting stuff earlier. And it took so long for it to start actually getting into mainstream American movies because they were so focused on sound first rather than visuals. So it's nice to start seeing people like John Ford really having a better eye for this and really setting these kind of more like moody atmospheres with amazing lighting and, like you're saying, camera work that feels much, much more modern than just setting it down somewhere and letting the actors do their thing. I don't know if you like looked into John Ford's directing styles and his drinking. And like, I don't want to ruin the mystique of John Ford or anything.
Please.
So he intentionally kept Victor McLaglen continually drunk and kept him off balance by like, he would change his schedules. He would be like, tomorrow you have off. And then he would call him in like, where are you? Like just gaslighting this man the entire time, was verbally abusive towards him on and off set. And so Victor McLaglen just really, really, really hated working with him and wanted to quit doing the whole movie, but they filmed it in 17 days. And that court scene was one of the ones that after all of this like stress and trouble that John Ford was putting Victor McLaglen through, he had been like, okay, you can have the day off tomorrow, and then instead called him in for the most intense scene of the movie. And on that day, for that scene, Victor was extremely hungover because of everything else that was going on with filming this. So that's just to look under the hood in terms of how this movie was made. But he did win Best Actor.
What have we said before? Jackie Cooper, Victor. I mean, these are the questions we have to ask ourselves. What lengths are we willing to go to? And it worked. I mean, that guy seemed like he was lit drunk the entire time. As a former drunk, I very much believed he was drunk. And now you're telling me he in fact was. So makes total sense. And he earned that Oscar. And I have to tell you, he became a stock actor that Ford turned to repeatedly throughout the rest of his career.
Interesting.
So
is it really acting though, or is it just more like he knows Daniel he can push him around?
That's the truest form of acting, is just becoming that role. So there's still have to nail your lines and convey the emotion you need to.
Yeah.
So it almost is more impressive if he was blasted the entire time. But
anything else to say about this one?
Glad you did that research. That's interesting.
Yeah, kind of because I was like, man, he's really good at acting drunk. And then I read that, I was like, oh, he's really good at acting while drunk.
So really, they should have given him the Oscar for drinking.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Next, we have Alice Adams, which is the story of a small town girl named Alice, played by Katharine Hepburn, who has big dreams, a modest background, and takes fake it till you make it to the next level. At a local dance held by one of the town's elite families, Alice meets and falls for the handsome, wealthy bachelor Arthur Russell, played by Fred McMurray. To impress him, Alice pretends her family lives in luxurious circumstances and struggles to maintain an illusion of sophistication while she grapples with the reality of her true working class roots. Throughout the film, her lies grow more elaborate, and despite cringe-worthy moments and social gaffes, Arthur sees something sincere in Alice's plucky charm and falls for her too. Eventually, the truth of their situation comes out when her father's new business venture falls apart and forces her to confront reality. She drops the act, owns her truth, and finally shows the genuine person beneath all the social window dressing. For some reason, she is accepted wholeheartedly for it, and everyone gets a happy ending. Ultimately, the truth sets her free. I just wish it would have set her free much, much, much earlier.
So I'm guessing you felt like this one was a little dragged out.
It was hard to watch. I'm so glad I watched it with Chrysantha because like it wasn't even secondhand embarrassment. It was like secondhand anger. It was just tough. It was tough to watch.
You know what I kept thinking of? That Nathan Fielder meme where it's just a big blown up shot of his face kind of inauthentically laughing. And he's like, I'm here partying with all my friends. They're just off camera. That was like the mentality she had at that whole dance that her brother brought her to. And nobody would accept her, even though she's going to all this trouble to try to look right, to say the right things. It's apparent to everybody she doesn't belong. It's rough.
Yeah, it's really rough to watch. And that was like the whole movie. And then all of her lies, like she was going to apply to be a secretary or something. And then Arthur sees her and she's like, oh, I was just going to hire a secretary for my dad, you know, and it's just sad. Like, stop. Yeah. Very painful.
When we were done watching it, I liked Hepburn in Little Women, you know, and I wanted to really like this movie. But then when we watched it, I was like, it was just cringy. And supposedly this is her favorite role that she ever did. And I find that kind of interesting.
Whole movie's on her
shoulders.
Well,
I guess that's true. But I just
like
feel
the
like
role is kind of like not,
yeah.
You know?
I felt like this wasn't
not a
as
great character.
Good. Yes. Yeah. I mean, but maybe there's more.
Haven't you guys ever been in a situation where you feel like a fish out of water and you're trying to fit in? Or you're just totally comfortable in your skin throughout your whole life?
I think mostly that or oblivious, you know? And particularly, I guess I would say the thing that makes it really not resonate for me is that she's trying to fit into like an elite social class of wealth and prestige. So rather than just wanting to be liked, she's wanting to be rich. She's wanting to be like all of these various things as more of like a status, you know?
I also just feel like her mother was insufferable. So, I mean, obviously that kind of trickles down to her and her view.
I know it wasn't as easy to do in that time period, but I did like yell at the screen, like, why don't you get a fucking job to the mother?
Yes.
She was putting the father through all that. And I'm not like trying to be patriarchal.
Her dad was
here,
the real victim in this movie.
I felt bad for the dad because he felt like kind of a simpleton. He obviously wasn't doing so well health-wise. And, you know, it's not like they're impoverished. Like they were like lower middle class
they're fine.
By the looks of things.
Yeah.
So I do feel like her and the mother were like these voracious social climbers that had like no relation to their material reality. So you guys are right. But I really liked Hepburn's performance. She's such an intelligent actress. The scene that really sticks out at me is when she's on the bench and the camera zooms in on her face and she's reclining and flirting with the guy. And then later they have the scene where before she will even let him talk, she's like, I guess, you know, you just have to leave because like the facade is broken.
It's over.
It's revealed that they don't have money and she's not good enough for him. So she's self-sabotaging. I like that element of her character. I know a lot of people like that. I feel like I've been in her shoes before to where I have been trying to impress people, maybe not for the same reasons, like class reasons. But, you know, like when you're a teenager, that's what it's like a lot, you know? And she's, I think, supposed to be playing late teens, early 20s.
Mm-hmm. I can see where it would resonate with people. I don't know, maybe just internally, I've always been a little bit more of like a individualist.
Good,
so
if you are.
Didn't quite land for me in that way. And again, because of that, felt overly drawn out. But her performance, I didn't really feel it necessarily when I was watching it. But later in a movie that we'll talk about soon, one of the actresses does a impression of Katharine Hepburn. And I was like, oh, that's reminds me of Katharine Hepburn. And then she specifically says like, oh, that was Katharine Hepburn in Morning Glory. And then that made me just realize and appreciate Katharine Hepburn's very unique style of delivery and facial mannerisms and everything, where when I think of her even now in this movie, a lot of those sequences, I'm just like, man, I really did like her in this, even though I kind of hated the main plot and much of like what her character was choosing to do, but she was kind of delightful in a weird way. So maybe we are all a little bit like Arthur Russell. I don't know.
I like that you're hitting on that, because she basically invented the fake mid-Atlantic accent, which is she uses to a T in this movie. And it made me realize why she made it, because this role, she's trying to act like an aristocrat in this bumblefuck town. And she's got these wide-eyed dreams, and it was so compelling, apparently, that like other people started emulating it, and it became this kind of mythological way of speaking in the golden age of cinema for a lot of actors that she kind of developed. And I wonder, did she, like, now I'm thinking back to Little Women, did she talk like that in Little Women? I don't really think she did. But in this, she sounds like that semi-British upper crust manner of speaking. And it feels like something she just made herself. It's cool.
Yeah.
I really liked her acting in Little Women, but I felt like in this one, she just did like delusional dazed wonderment very well. Like she would, when she would go into her fantasies or her life, like she just would stare off into the distance with that weird kind of forced smile. It would just feel kind of creepy to me. I'm like, I remember commenting with Sarah, I'm like, can she just stop smiling? Like it was
flirting,
weird.
And I thought it was kind of hot.
Okay.
I do want to see more of Katharine Hepburn. I just do not want to see Alice Adams ever again.
Yeah, same.
If that story doesn't resonate for you, I could guess that would be a drag. It was a little long, but I definitely sympathized with Alice. I used to try to hang out with the older kids when I was little, and they called me Baby Jake and bring me around. In high school, I would be a sophomore and they'd be seniors, and you're trying to be cool. I feel like most people have been through that, but hers was a more magnified version.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I think that it's a story and a like feeling that many, many people have felt and will resonate with. And it's just taken to the extreme for comedy and for drama reasons. It just wasn't one that landed for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same. I always never really cared about fitting in.
Chrysanthemum and I are introverts, you know.
I need love, just like Katharine.
Well, maybe you should speak in a mid-Atlantic accent, Jake. Did you ever
Be careful what you
distance.
wish for. Yeah. Next episode, you guys will be like, this is insufferable. We're not doing this anymore.
All right, we ready to move on?
Yep.
Yeah.
Next, we have Top Hat, which is a sparkling screwball comedy where Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers dance their way through a whirlwind of mistaken identities, romantic mix-ups, and many glamorous outfits. We saw them last in a very similar movie, ultimately, last episode, The Gay Divorcee. This feels a little bit like the same movie, just in different outfits. In this one, Astaire plays the charming Jerry Travers, a Broadway star who falls head over heels for Dale Tremont, played by Rogers. Things go awry when she mistakenly is led to believe that he's married to her friend Madge, who she's supposed to meet up with in Italy. Cue a series of comically convoluted misunderstandings as Jerry tries to woo Dale with dance numbers, confused at the mixed signals he's getting. Meanwhile, Dale fends him off with increasing confusion, convinced that he's charming but off limits, and can't understand why Madge seems to be giving her approval whenever she spots them together. The plot basically hinges on everyone refusing to ask one simple clarifying question, but who needs logic when you've got dance? Yeah. Eventually, the truth does come out, love triumphs, and we get another happy ending that cements Astaire and Rogers as the perfect duo for this type of musical rom-com.
Yeah, I think even that hotel was the same. Like a lot of the sets were the same. And it's literally the same cast, just slightly different roles.
Yeah, the Alberto Bedini, like he was in the, like it's,
and the butler.
It literally just felt like the same movie. But I really enjoyed this one. Somehow, even though it felt like the same movie, I think I liked this one more.
It was funny. I liked it. I think, I enjoyed it. The outfits were nice. Like I liked the costuming.
I think they had really good dance sequences in this. So in The Gay Divorcee, they had like a 17-minute long one that kind of dragged way too long. And it wasn't even Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. It was just kind of like an ensemble thing
NPCs.
for the most of it. Yeah, just a bunch of NPCs. So this one, I think they did better focusing more on their dance sequences because they just dance truly so beautifully together. And again, not to reference another movie that we'll talk about, but there's another movie that we'll talk about soon that had a lot of dancing in it. But even though I was like very technically impressed, like, man, what they're doing is very impressive, it didn't feel like magic on screen.
So
whereas
funny. I had the inverse between the two movies.
I know, you're crazy. You're crazy. No, because like the sequence for this is also the movie where the song Cheek to Cheek, like it was made for this movie, and the dance direction in that was so beautiful, even though her dress was a little ridiculous with all of the feathers and where it's just like sometimes getting her in the face and stuff, where I was like, okay, it has nice movement, but maybe a different dress would have been a little bit better here. But I love that song, and two, just that dance sequence was so well choreographed that while I was like writing the summary and stuff for this movie, I was like, I'm gonna go watch that again. It was just a really nice sequence.
Well, I'm gonna tell you folks, these motherfuckers in these movies love to dance, Fred and Ginger. I mean, Fred loves to dance so much that rather than stopping dancing, he throws sand all over the floor of his buddy's hotel room so that he can keep tap dancing without there being noise. That's how much this man needs to dance. And a recurring theme, because I watched this one alone, a scene would start and I would say out loud to myself, this is going to end in a dance. I can already tell this is going to end in a dance. And that happened like 5 times throughout the movie. And the dancing is good. Like you're saying, dancing is good. It's impressive. It's just, it's so interesting that you say that, because I'm ready to talk about the other movie that has a lot of dance. And for me, that dance was a lot more impressive than in this one. This one, I get it's like him and her together is cool, but it gets repetitive to me.
Sure, yeah. I'm not necessarily saying as a whole the entire movie, but when you watch how they dance, there's like a real fluidity to their movement, which feels almost more like, I don't know, like ice skating almost.
Right.
It's just a smoothness to the way that they dance. Whereas in the other one, it's a lot more rigid. It feels more like you're going to go see a dance performance. And like I said, just a little stiff. And this is coming from someone who like would never be able to pull off 10% of what it was. I was joking with Chrysantha because we watched this one together, that when we watched the next one, Broadway Melody of 1936, I was literally eating popcorn like, I don't know, she looks too stiff. I'm the meme. I'm literally the couch, the armchair expert who will literally never do any of tap dancing. Yeah. But yeah, so no, their dance in routines in this, the music, the costuming was all very good. I thought it was fun. Good comedy in it.
If it's your lane, you're going to love it. Couple of things I just want to hit on here. Okay, so they go to Italy. Let's keep in mind, Italy is in the grip of fascism at this point in history. And when they go there, it looks like Caesar's Palace in Atlantic City. I just have to say, it looks so gaudy and not real. But hey, we're having fun. It's like Disney version of Italy.
Yeah, I really think they should have just done the Ernst Lubitsch sort of thing where it's like a made-up country.
Yeah.
Like, don't bring modern countries into it, especially because it already is so fantastical that I feel like that fits better than putting it in the real world.
Right. You're right. I do kind of miss Maurice. But Maurice is so hot and cool, he doesn't have to tap dance. But anyway. Yeah, I thought it was funny that the whole conflict, like you said, could have been solved very easily, but instead she spends 3/4 of the movie thinking she's best friends with a swinger. And it's just escalating more and more.
Madge just like winking and giving a thumbs up, and she's like, what is going on?
She's like so grossed out. But she's like, eventually she's like, all right, well, she's good with it. You're not.
Yes, okay.
That was funny. And I do love the recurring friend in these movies. He's like funny. He's just got a funny face.
Like, I think they'd all just have good chemistry together.
Yeah. I don't dislike these movies. I just, I don't know.
They're not what you care about. Because it is very much style over substance for these. It just happens that I enjoy this type of style and fun. And so it works for me.
Fair enough.
All right. So next is the movie that we couldn't help but reference, I guess, multiple times throughout this so far. Broadway Melody of 1936. First of all, it is not a remake of the second Academy Award Best Picture winner Broadway Melody, which we watched in episode 2. And also, it didn't come out in 1936. It came out in 1935, so the title's all over the place. I don't really understand what was going on there. But to get into the story a little bit, Broadway Melody of 1936 kicks off with successful Broadway producer Bob Gordon, played by Robert Taylor, who is under pressure to deliver a hit show. But then the story mostly follows an aspiring chorus girl, Mary, who's played by Eleanor Powell, who dated Bob in high school and is looking to convince him to help her with her big break on Broadway by giving her a part in his next show. Eventually, when they meet, he patronizingly explains to her that she shouldn't want to join Broadway and she'd be much happier back home in Albany. She pretends to agree with him, and although he sees her off at the train station, she gets off at the next stop to conspire with his secretary, Kitty, played by Una Merkel, who has an idea to get her the main part. With a wig and some makeup, she reinvents herself as Mademoiselle Arlette, an allegedly famous French performer completely manufactured by a gossip columnist in order to get back at Bob Gordon in the first place. Arlette dazzles at her audition and gets the part, but the lies unravel when the gossip columnists threaten to come out with the truth since they've essentially gotten a cease and desist from a real Mademoiselle Arlette, who coincidentally does exist in France. In order for her dream to not fall apart, she gets their help to ensure that she's the main event at an elaborate dinner celebration that night, which is meant to celebrate the opening of the show in one last attempt to show Bob that she really does deserve the part. Of course, it's a huge success, and while Bob watches Irene dance, he realizes that it was her all along. Ambition and optimism wins the day. Everyone gets their happy ending.
Another happy ending.
There are a lot of happy endings, except for The Informer. This one kind of reminded me, though, of 42nd Street more than Broadway Melody.
Yes.
In a lot of ways.
Yes, agreed.
I don't know. I thought there was going to be a tie to the other Broadway Melody we saw, but it wasn't. Cool. It was completely different. The shenanigans were fun. The dancing was impressive, like the technicality of it. But I'm not going to say like it won me over. Sometimes with the tap dancing, it was just like, can you hurry up? Like, let's like
tap your way off screen.
Yeah, it's like, we get it. You're good. You know, she was very impressive. She had a lot of stamina, endurance. She was talented. But like, I did feel like it was a bit too much. Like, I'm with Sarah, where I enjoyed the dancing from Top Hat a little bit more. And I did like the brother and the sister, I believe.
The Disney adults on the rooftop. The guy had the Mickey sweatshirt.
I liked their characters.
That guy was cool as fuck. He was so strange.
Yeah, he was super chill.
Cool. Yeah, I'm glad you hit on them because they were my favorite part. That whole dancing with the breakfast, and he had the Mickey sweatshirt on and just kind of had a strange affectation, said a lot of funny stuff. I looked him up. He lived to be quite old, and he had quite a storied career in Hollywood and on TV. I think he might have hit the new millennium, if I'm not mistaken, in which case, really cool. But yeah, it's funny, you guys. I mean, it doesn't sound like you're necessarily negative on this movie, but lukewarm, or at least not quite as good as Top Hat in some sense. But for me, this was another one that I'm like, okay, I'm starting to get into musicals a little bit more. And a couple things for that. I love the staging for this, like those numbers on the rooftop. I thought that was such a cool venue, just visually, to do those performances. To me, like, I really wanted to be on that rooftop and dress like those people. And at that party, I think it looked so cool and like a little snapshot from another world. Yeah, it's not necessarily believable or realistic, but it was like extra real. And I thought it was cool. And well, one thing I want to mention, a couple things. Somebody makes a joke. you look about as effeminate as Wallace Brewery, which I was really
Yeah.
proud and happy to got that reference, and I wouldn't have if not for all these movies we've watched together.
Yeah.
But I also loved the recurring bit of the director character going into the tabloid writer's office and punching him, and very dramatically and like sped up film backflipping each time he would punch him. I don't know if you guys laughed at that sight gag, but I was dying each time it happened. And then finally they get ready for it enough the third time they have the catcher's mask on, but he still sucks him anyway. But the first time that happens, I wanted to rewind and watch it again because it's just, he does this comedic backflip. It was great.
That was funny to me, but I have to mention on this sort of topic, this movie probably had some of my most hated scenes this year, which were the whole side gag with the guy snoring and like going through the different forms of snoring.
That was dragged out way too much.
It was dragged out way too long. I hated the sounds of it because like no one wants to listen to snoring, but especially when you're doing like 2.5 minutes for the first scene and then he comes back for like another 2 minutes and then he's back in the end very briefly. And I was like, who edited this? Why did this make this in here? It made me so irrationally mad.
No, I hear that. That was like, it was funny for like a minute. And then I was like, okay.
It was funny for 2 seconds.
Yeah. It didn't really have an extra spin later. He just kept doing, I'm like, oh yeah, I've heard somebody snore like that. Oh yeah, I've heard somebody snore like that. I'm like, let's move on.
Just trying to get into the show with his snoring routine. And I'm like,
but I like the way it's like people are so desperate for fame, you know, like that's like very, if you've seen the latest season of The Rehearsal, that Nathan Fielder, this is the second time bring up Nathan Fielder, but they hit on that towards the end. I won't spoil anything, but let's just say if you have the entertainment buzz, the length some people will go to can be extreme. But counterpoint to your criticism of the tap dancing too long, I don't mean to sound like a dog here, but when she's auditioning and she does that like 5 to 6 minute long straight tap sequence, I mean, she looks great in that, like her outfit, and I was very enraptured. She's a very pretty woman, so I like that scene. Like, I'd much rather watch that than fucking Fred Astaire flipping around.
Yeah. So very talented, both in like the actual dance and again in the acting, because she's the one who did the Katharine Hepburn impression that I had mentioned, and I think just really nailed it. So she was very good. Great. I just, like I said, I could take or leave this movie.
All right.
Any other thoughts?
Nope, none for me. Oh, I do have to mention that one sequence when she's imagining herself on stage.
Yeah,
and
with
it shows her, like she's astral projecting or something. I did love the set, like where she's dancing. I think it was one of the first dance sequences that she wasn't tap dancing in, and that one was really pretty, where she had like, I'm assuming it was like a chrome tree, and it had like all these pearl decorations hanging down. I thought that sequence was so beautiful.
I agree. All right,
more
moving on to well, okay, I won't even preface this with anything, but because I don't know how people felt about this one, and I don't want to give away how I feel about it. So next movie is A Midsummer Night's Dream, which is, of course, based off the Shakespeare play of the same name, and it is basically Max Reinhardt's fever dream, where love is confusing, the forest is enchanted, and nobody's quite sure who they're supposed to be kissing. So this all takes place in Athens, allegedly, even though it doesn't really give those vibes, but we'll pretend, where Hermia and Lysander love each other, but her father insists she marries Demetrius instead. So, of course, the father takes the matter to the Duke, because that's what you do, I guess, to resolve who your daughter should marry, to rule on what Hermia should do. So the Duke, who is currently preparing for his own wedding and can't really make time, rules that Hermia's choices are either to die, become a celibate follower of Diana, or marry Demetrius, as her father said. So, of course, Hermia and Lysander decide to defy orders and run away into the woods together that night. Demetrius, who actually does love Hermia and is supposed to be marrying her, follows them to convince her to return with him. Helena follows Demetrius to convince him to accept her as his silver medal because Hermia clearly doesn't want him. And meanwhile, a troupe of bumbling amateur actors who are preparing a tragically awful play for the Duke's wedding decide that the woods are the best place to stop and practice. Of course, unbeknownst to all of them, they are entering the woods at the precise moment that the fairy king Oberon and Queen Titania are fighting over who gets custody over a changeling child. Everyone seems to get sleepy around the same time, so Oberon decides the best way to get back at Titania and get what he wants is to have the mischievous and outrageously energetic Puck use a magic flower that causes someone to fall in love with the next living thing that they see. Initially, it's meant just for Titania, but he overhears Helena pleading with Demetrius to love her, feels sorry for her, and instructs Puck to use it on Demetrius too so that the humans can have their happy ending. Puck, of course, has no idea what anyone looks like, so he accidentally uses the flower on Lysander, who wakes up and falls in love with Helena. He then encounters the actors practicing their play and, just for fun, turns Bottom's head into a donkey's head, or an ass. Bottom, ass. Anyway, Oberon seeks out Puck. Yeah. So Oberon seeks out Puck to tell him that he used the flower on the wrong human man and instructs him to fix it. Puck fixes it by finding Demetrius, the original target, and using the flowers so that he also wakes to fall in love with Helena. So now Helena has 2 suitors and Hermia has none. Meanwhile, Titania wakes up and the first living thing she sees is Bottom, who is wandering around distraught and frightened by his transformation. She immediately falls in love, becoming the first furry in film. It's complete chaos, and eventually Oberon, after having stolen away the changeling child to get what he wants for himself, feels bad enough to instruct Puck to do a little oopsie-poopsie correction and undo the enchantments on everyone except Demetrius. Ultimately, lovers end up paired correctly. Bottom gets his human head back, and everyone thinks it was just a dream. Later, at the Duke's wedding, the play within a play is treated as a comedy and earns laughter and approval from the human royals. Visually lush and drenched in fairy dust and cellophane, the film turns a tangled tale of romantic confusion into a sparkling spectacle. A Midsummer Night's Dream is part romantic comedy, part dreamlike hallucination, and proof that magic, love, and Shakespearean mischief are best enjoyed with a little or a lot of flair and sparkle. Whew!
I am so thankful I did not have to summarize that. Bravo, Sarah. You took something that to me was pretty convoluted, and now I understand the movie better.
You will notice that I did not put actors' names in this one because I'm like, look, there are a lot of characters. Yeah. I'm not going to confuse this with the actors' names in this. There's too much going
I'm glad I watched this with Sarah, because had I watched it alone, I think I would have been dazzled by the visuals. Yeah, I don't know. Like, she had to explain like what they were talking, because I mean, obviously they're speaking in like that Shakespearean language.
It's verbatim. Verbatim dialogue from the play.
For me, it's kind of hard to understand. I remember in high school, and you'd have to read the Shakespeare. Oh my God, it was so horrible. It was hard. Like, I hated it because I was like, I don't know what the hell, like, what's going on. But like, aside from that, like, I loved the visuals in this film. I loved the fantastical part of it. Puck did kind of annoy me with his laugh. Like, I was just like, okay, I get it the first couple of times, but can you just stop, please?
Yeah.
Which we have to mention. It's oh my God, Mickey Rooney, child Mickey Rooney.
I know the name, but I actually don't really know who Mickey
I know him
Rooney
from like
is,
the 60s and stuff, but then he's like middle-aged. So now to see him as this child was wild.
As a child. On probably like cocaine. I don't know how this. I
wrote down in my notes, Puck is a little fuck.
yeah. Consistently throughout, I was like, he's just such a little shit.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, I'm going to lay all my cards out on the table. Like you, Chrysantha, I've performed Shakespeare. It is not my favorite. I find the dialogue to be constricting, and I oftentimes do not understand everything that is being said. And I was specifically not familiar with this play, so I did not know what the fuck was going on some of the time. Like the fairy war. From what I'm glad your interpretation was similar to mine, because the horny male fairy king, I thought he was trying to get with the white fairy queen, but then it appeared they were having a custody battle over a small Indian child, and I didn't understand why. And then there were different types of fairies, and they seemed to have a war occurring. It was very complex, but It was, like you said, Chrysantha, very visually stunning. I mean, the costumes, the way they were flying across the screen, I was like, wow, how are they doing this on like a practical level?
Yeah, that was really impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one thing, because I kind of expected it in a movie of this age, right, where they're doing those sorts of things, to be able to maybe see the wires or see how they're doing things, but genuinely could not. Like, it just really, really looked very, very good. And I guess like cellophane around this time was just starting to be manufactured. So that's that kind of like real shimmery, sort of not plasticky, but kind of plasticky material that they used a lot when they were filming scenes in Fairyland to make it seem much more like otherworldly and stuff. So a lot of money, a lot of time, everything. Yeah, it looked beautiful. So there definitely props to all of the sets and costuming and everything that went into it. And then what I would like to mention, because we talked about music earlier, the score for this also is very good. It used a lot of just classical Felix Mendelssohn music, which was made for an adaptation of this in general. But I don't know, I walked away from this just feeling like this was one of the better, particularly like when it's pure Shakespeare, when they're using the same dialogue and stuff, adaptations that I've seen for like one of his comedies, especially. But it was just, I don't know, I really enjoyed it. Once you kind of understand what's going on and get past the convoluted opening where it's just like, there are so many characters and so much, what am I watching? Then it's really great. I also want to call out James Cagney. I thought he was great as Bottom. Like, he just, all of his mannerisms. I do kind of think that Dick Powell, he's the one who played Lysander. We saw both of them in movies last year, but I feel like he was a little bit out of place in this. Maybe it's because like post Love Potion, I think the kind of like humor and goofiness that Dick Powell was bringing to it made sense. But pre that, I feel like I could still feel some of that humor even when they were like plotting to run away together so that they could get married, like a technically more dramatic, right, opening for them. But also wanted to point out that Ross Alexander, who we mentioned last time for his kind of tragic
was that
shortly
guy?
after this. He was in this one too, and also in Captain Blood. So he showed up in a few movies this year. So kind of, yeah.
But I could see that.
I did like the meta play though towards the end.
Yeah,
and
it was so funny.
That guy playing the woman's voice,
and just like how terrible they are. Like, I do think it's really hard to nail the bad acting in the play within a play to the point where it truly does become comedy. And this has been my favorite rendition of that, where it's like they are trying so hard and they are so torn by like wanting to appreciate the clapping and but also being confused because it's like, no, this is supposed to be a tragic drama, but what is happening? Everyone's forgetting their lines, you know, like it's so good. Like I really love that, because normally in A Midsummer Night's Dream, by that play within a play part, I'm kind of like, oh, I liked all the fairy love quadrangle shenanigans more, and then this part just kind of is whatever. But in this version of it, I really enjoyed it. I was laughing.
It felt like a neat little reward at the end of the fairy war. I loved that ending play. It was cute, and just the facial expressions of all the actors. They won't let the one guy say his lines, you know. The crowd. But that was, you know, the cool thing about that, and the way this is portrayed in that play is like, that's how Shakespearean theater was. It was very much audience involved, clap back, much like a Rocky Horror Picture type situation these days. So I went to the Globe Theater last year and it was very much that type of vibe. I thought that was neat. Like, I almost wish might revitalize theater in America if we had that more often, you know?
I also think that because of that, and like knowing that that was kind of a very normal environment to watch many of Shakespeare's plays in, like, it made it extra funny that the play within a play in this one is in a lot of ways kind of parodying Romeo and Juliet, right? Like, so his own work in there, his own drama, but people not understanding the severity of it, treating it like a comedy that like, oh, you know, the lover's like accidental suicide sort of thing, you know?
Well, it's interesting.
So it was just funny to have
the
that
context too. Shakespeare was writing more tragedies and historical stuff when Queen Elizabeth was in power because she was patronizing his plays to some extent, and she was a more kind of serious person. But after she died, King James from Scotland came down to be in power, and he was kind of a weird guy, was really into like witchcraft and mystical stuff, and like he wrote a new Bible. He was kind of an esoteric guy, put it that way. And my understanding is this and Macbeth, which is Scottish themed, were really kind of catering to his tastes. And so you kind of see that shift in some of Shakespeare's tones with some of his later works.
Right.
I will say for the listeners, if you're ever interested just to see for the visuals, for me watching this, it reminded me a lot of when I first watched Fantasia, kind of like along the lines of that kind of fantastical.
Yeah.
On that kind of same note, this movie, it did win for Best Cinematography. Hal Moore was the cinematographer for this. And kind of interesting note there, he wasn't actually nominated. He actually won because of how many write-ins he got for this movie. So
wow,
I feel like that's extra impressive because write-ins like didn't even know they could win.
Art to the people.
Know? But of course, the following year, apparently the Academy decided that it would not accept write-in votes for awards anymore. So yeah, ruining all the fun.
Right.
All right. Are we ready for our last movie?
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
All right. Our final nominee, Captain Blood, stars Errol Flynn as Dr. Peter Blood, a mild-mannered physician in 17th century England who's sentenced to slavery after treating a wounded rebel. He's shipped off to the Caribbean, where through the help of Arabella Bishop, played by Olivia de Havilland, who was also in Midsummer Night's Dream, which I think was her breakout role. Yeah. Anyway, with the help of her, she buys him for £10, so he's able to mostly avoid hard labor to instead use his medical skills to treat the current governor's gout. When a Spanish raid throws the island into chaos, Blood leads an escape with fellow slaves to commandeer a Spanish ship. Now with no homeland and no choice, he turns pirate but brings civility and strategy to the high seas, quickly earning a reputation as a gentleman rogue. His fame and his name spreads as he outmaneuvers rivals and naval powers alike, but fate complicates things when Arabella is captured aboard a prize ship, which in some ways allows Blood to turn the tables and buy her this time, because nothing says romance more than ownership. After an argument, he ultimately decides to return her to Port Royal, risking his own freedom as he's still a wanted man there. His crew gets there just in time for another invasion, this time by the French, and Blood learns that if he helps the English cause, he and his crew will have a royal pardon. So after an extravagant and very expensive battle at sea, they emerge victorious, leading not only to the promised pardon, but to the status of governor and, of course, Arabella's love.
I loved this film. Like, I loved it. It gripped me from the beginning, like all the way to the end. Like, it was so good. The pacing, I loved the story. I mean, I had heard of Errol Flynn, never saw like anything with him, and I was just captivated by his performance. He is also a very handsome man.
Hot as fuck. Let's be honest.
But when I looked into him, I was very upset at what I found.
Okay, so I didn't look into him because Jake had mentioned like looking into him being like, oh no. So I was like, okay, I'm going to just be completely head empty for the podcast. And now I'm going to have you guys tell me about why Errol Flynn is terrible because I'm very curious. I had only heard the name. And
are we putting the cart before the horse by zeroing in on Errol so quickly before expounding on how much you enjoyed the movie? And there were definitely a lot of elements that I enjoyed in this movie too.
Okay, we'll circle back. We'll
We'll talk about the good things and then leave the other stuff at the end. But yeah, like I said, like everything about this movie I loved. How it was like in 3 different kind of like phases. Like it just felt like reading a really good epic adventure and then just seeing like you're just following this character. I don't know. It was awesome. I loved it. And I'm just going to be repeating myself. I just really, really enjoyed this movie and I could see myself going back to watch it again.
I love that you liked it. I get what you're saying. Like, I really love the action sequences. I thought it was a major step up. That fencing sequence, man, I just said out loud watching it. fencing is cool as shit. Like I should have done that. But I feel like it's like a rich kid sport, like horses. But anyway, he has such a journey throughout the movie, and it's kind of cool because he maintains his principles throughout. But couple things I have to hit on just about things that were, shall we say, problematic or strange about this movie that I don't think detract from the fact of it being entertaining. But like, there were not white slaves.
They're all white people. All of this. Yes, this is, I was just like, not. Yeah.
Like
every
there
single
was
person
something
was
called
white.
indentured servitude, where if you got really into debt or were impoverished in England or Scotland, you could buy your passage to the New World by selling your labor for like 5 to 10 years when you got there. But you would not have been property. And you certainly, if you were a slave, you would not have been communicating with your owner in the way that he is to Annabella, or like riding a horse openly through town. So I thought it was very strange. And I was like, why did they do it this way? And I don't know if it's like Hays Code to where they didn't feel like you could portray slavery the way it actually was. I thought it was really weird that there was a black slave playing a drum while all the white slaves were working. And I was like, what kind of inverted,
very weird
bullshit is this? So it was like they were trying to capture some imagery of that, but like make whites the victim. So I don't, that whole element was very strange to me. But setting that aside, the rest of the movie was pretty cool. It was kind of like, felt a little dude's rock again. And I loved his way of running his pirate ship. It was very kind of like socialistic in a way, like the Vikings. It was like we all put it into the sovereign wealth fund and draw based on our contributions. I thought that was cool. And like, even like as a 98% heterosexual guy, I will say, like, I was just like, he's just really handsome. This guy is like 2 feet taller than everyone around him, and he just looks like an Olympian god. So it was just cool to see someone that hot doing so many dashing things.
That's so funny. Okay, so couple things on my end. So definitely same thoughts, because I was like, this is the Caribbean. All of these slaves are white. What is happening in this movie?
Yeah.
But also just in general. So as a modern viewer, I think this one didn't quite do as much for me, but imagining it at the time, first watching it, like compared to the other movies that we've been watching, right? The just like scale of adventure, everything about it was more energetic and kind of like more high budget than a lot of movies produced at the time, especially for this type of adventure film. So not like fantastical like Midsummer Night's Dream, nothing highbrow, just like fun. So it reminded me a little bit of like when Pirates of the Caribbean came out.
Yes.
So for me, I saw that 7 times in theaters. So like I can imagine, like I loved that movie. I was like, damn, Captain Jack Sparrow, this whole like adventure. So I can imagine this being that for like 1935 preteen Sarah.
The epic.
Similarly, Pirates of the Caribbean, phenomenal score. Like the music in that movie really elevates the sense of adventure so much. And in this one as well, this was, I think, the first movie to have a full original score. So like Midsummer Night's Dream was mostly classical music, set to this. Whereas this one was composed almost entirely for this movie. And I was absolutely noticing throughout, and it really, really did give another layer of immersion, excitement, emotion, like kind of went through all of the different things because of the music on top of everything else. And then my other kind of point would just be like Errol Flynn, like I can see it, but he didn't really stand out to me in the same way that it seems like he did for both of you. And so now I'm really curious to hear the dark side.
I guess that's a good opening to dovetail into that. So Errol Flynn was a fucking psychopath. If you look up like the definition of the word hedonist, it should be his picture in there. Just to go over some of the things. He was a pedophile. He had a penchant for like 15-year-old girls throughout his life. And when he died at the young age of 50 from complications from cirrhosis of his liver, because he was constantly drinking, but he died while on a trip with a 17-year-old girl. He had a heart attack and other complications. While he was married, this was his third marriage, didn't have anything to do with the wife at that point. But, just to point out some of the most egregious things that he engaged in his life, in his home, he had two-way mirrors and peepholes in all the bathrooms and in the bedrooms. And he would invite women over and spy on them in their most intimate moments. What else? Oh, so this pissed me off. He went to the Spanish Civil War, which, if you know anything about the 1930s, the big kind of activist cause of the time was the Civil War going on in Spain between the Republicans and Socialists on one side and the fascists supported by Hitler on the other. And there were a lot of progressive-minded journalists, Hollywood people would send money or aid to the Republican side or go and help you actually fight. And Errol Flynn publicized a big trip there. Well, he went there for a day. He sent a fake telegram to Paris while he was there saying that he'd been killed in action, left the next day, and it was all a publicity stunt for his movie coming out. So pretty shameless in that sense. But then by the end of his life in 1959, he went to Cuba and actually did a documentary on Fidel Castro's revolution. So that's kind of an interesting transition through his life. That's one tiny, interesting, positive note in his life. But he tried to go to World War II. They would not let him go because he had a bunch of health issues, basically every venereal disease you can imagine. And he was like lit drunk 24 hours a day. He was on heroin in the 40s. And if you look at a picture of him, this was like his first big movie. He looked so good. And by the time he died, he was just this like bloated, leathery mess. I mean, still handsome in a way, but like you could see he had done a number on himself. So a very interesting life, one cut short by self-indulgence, but I'm glad you didn't know any of that when you watched it, because I didn't know until like 3/4 of the way through the movie. I was like, this guy's so hot, I got to look him up. And I was like, no.
Yeah, I was like shocked when I found all that out. It's crazy. I was like, wow. It's kind of like Sean Combs, but in like 1935.
E. Diddy for the elders.
Just knowing all this, all that crap was like going on.
Right,
I mean, obviously, it was going on back then, but like in Hollywood.
Well, that's the thing, is it was going on like even worse. But like people were so repressed on the surface.
Well, this just all goes back to like the studio control stuff, because studios had such a like chokehold on reporting and branding and the way that you presented yourself, that all of this was very like hidden. But even within MGM, I don't know if we'd ever mentioned, but there were brothels loosely tied to MGM Studios where they specifically had people working at them who looked like the stars at the time. Like there was just like a lot of seedy sort of things going on. And obviously like you see a lot more of the impact of that with people like Jackie Cooper, who, had to grow up in that environment and really like struggled with a lot of aspects of that sort of environment and fame. So yeah, there was definitely crazy shit going on, but it's still surprising when you're like, skeletons and
it's impossible to emphasize how drunk everyone was all the time.
Apparently,
it was just what's that? Nick and Nora from last year, The Thin Man. That was the reality for a lot of people in this time period.
Just sucks because like I really did. I liked the story in this movie, and then when I read all that, I was like, damn.
You can separate the art from the artist.
Especially when the artist is dead. I feel like it's easier to be like, okay, well, now that they're not getting any kind of benefit from this.
All right.
On that pleasant note about some of our favorite stars, I feel like I'm noticing more things now that the Hays Code is fully enforced, where there are like specific themes that a lot of these movies seem to have. Almost all of these had a happy ending. Which that was not the case in previous years. And I think that has a lot to do with the Hays Code really sanitizing movies, where moral order is what wins out in the end, no matter what, or everyone kind of gets what they deserve. And I know that was a core part of what the Hays Code was trying to enforce with the storytelling at that time, and starting to see it for sure. There's a lot of like redemption, personal transformation, kind of moral stories, class anxiety, but social mobility because America, So I'm just seeing like a lot of those things in these movies.
Very idealized interpretation of reality. Mm-hmm. Wonder how long that will last.
Yeah, really curious to see how that develops over time and if this early on it was maybe harder to get away with things like people had to conform more strongly and that'll loosen over time, or if it'll just kind of get worse overall. So curious overall to see what, because I don't know anything about Mutiny on the Bounty. So curious to see where that falls in terms of like a lot of these themes and stuff.
I'm excited to see this iteration. It'll be the first time I've seen this early of an interpretation of it.
There's a remake out there?
There are two.
This has been made several times. Like every 30 years they make one, it seems like.
Because there's one with why do I
Mel,
always
Mel
forget
Gibson,
Marlon
Anthony
Brando.
Hawk. Oh yeah, that one's the 60th.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So one day.
Okay, folks. Well, we will be right back after watching Mutiny on the Bounty, and we're going to tell you all about it here in just a few. Welcome back, listeners. We have just completed viewing Mutiny on the Bounty, the first iteration of this film, which was remade several times over the decades. So some of you guys may know the version from the 1960s or even the 1980s, but this is, I think, the first time it was put to film. Here, 1935's Best Picture winner. Like normal, I'll start out with a little overview. So Mutiny on the Bounty opens in 1789, and it opens on Clark Gable playing a young Fletcher Christian, who is an officer in the British Navy, and he's being sent out to press gang young men in a local tavern into the Navy. For those that don't know, in this time period, while the British ruled the seas, very common practice for the Navy was to compel young men and prisoners and thieves and whatnot into joining the Navy to work as kind of deckhands and lower positions. They're a little frightened, but also Clark Gable is giving kind of a supportive vibe and tells them, great opportunity essentially awaits them. So their task is to join Captain William Bligh, played by Charles Laughton, who, as we mentioned before, had a really stellar year this year. Captain of the Bounty, the ship the movie is named after. They're going to be going on a 2-year voyage, actually, to the South Pacific, the islands of Tahiti, where their mission is to pick up 1,000 plants of what they call breadfruit and bring them to the West Indies, where they're going to be replanted as a very effective food source for slaves working in the British Empire in that portion of the empire. So not exactly a moral mission, but one that, as I say, will take 2 years and will be a major undertaking. Captain William Bligh is renowned for his disciplinarian nature. He's a very authoritarian captain. He definitely leans more towards the rod than the stick, and that will have implications for our story. Along with William Bligh and his kind of second in command, Fletcher Charles, and then they're also joined by another young officer. This is his first voyage, Roger Byam, who's played by Francois Tone, who's another actor that we've seen a few times up till now. So they set out. It's a long journey, as I say, but it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly that William Bligh is not a soft administrator by any stretch. He is arbitrarily flogging shipmen over minor infractions or even imagined infractions. It even gets so bad that at one point, again, over a relatively minor infraction, he chucks a sailor overboard tied to a rope to punish him in the ocean. But the young man hits his head on the ship underneath and is killed. So that just goes to show how extreme the punishments get. And it starts to really rub Fletcher Christian the wrong way, the second in command guy, who is a little bit more popular with the men. He understands that you kind of have to mix discipline, but also encouragement and positivity in administering a crew. And so he is trying to, at first, voice his concern to the captain in kind of a respectful way, but the captain is just not receptive to it. So their resentment builds. It seems like the captain is going to wait to get back to England to court-martial him when they finally arrive in Tahiti. And Tahiti is portrayed in this movie to be, sort of a paradise, an otherworldly, simple place away from modernity. When their ship arrives there, there's this fleet of small canoes of Tahitan men and women coming out to greet them happily. with flowers and food and other things to welcome them. They know that when the British come, they bring goods to trade and other indications of technology and prosperity. Because Captain Blythe is still resentful towards Fletcher Christian for challenging him, he relegates him to stay on the ship. But most of the rest of the men, including Roger Byam, that young officer, get to go onto the island and get to know the locals. They get to know the chief, who's a very kindly, benevolent chief. They seem to have a really egalitarian outlook on the island where food is seemingly plentiful and the main concern is, having festivities every night, dancing and music. So it just seems like after a year-long voyage of hell, these men have finally found their way to paradise. And eventually, even Fletcher Christian is given some time on the island, some shore leave. So him and his buddy Byam, by this point, they're quite close friends. They get to know the chief's daughters, and they actually develop a relationship with the chief's daughters. But as everyone knows, this cannot last, unfortunately. The crew does have a mission, so they gather their crops up, rejoin the Bounty, and set off on their way to the West Indies. Well, of course, Captain Blythe is right back to his old ways of discipline and cruelty, and it isn't long before he pushes everyone too far. He punishes a group of men unjustly and leaves a couple to basically wither away and die in the bottom hold. Well, Fletcher goes down and sees this, and finally he snaps. He agrees with the men that it's time to mutiny, and so he gathers up a group of like-minded shipmen, stages a mutiny. There's mass fighting on the ship. Some men are killed. Captain Blythe and his inner circle and other men who aren't comfortable with the mutiny are rounded up, put onto a small ship, not big enough for, 20, and yet there's like 15 packed on there, given some food, and they're 3,500 miles away from the nearest friendly port. And so they're basically as good as dead. So Fletcher and his mutineers go their way on the Bounty. They're on the way back to Tahiti, while Captain Blythe and his 15 or so men are left to struggle and survive. We actually see Captain Blythe not turn over a new leaf so much as recognize the gravity of his situation. He kind of uses his harsh mentality and skill set to keep everyone alive, is very serious about rationing appropriately and getting them to that port, and miraculously they do survive, although by the time they get there, everyone is emaciated and looks like real hell. Though he's certainly a cruel man, in the right circumstances, Captain Blythe was able to help everyone survive. So we jump now back to Fletcher Christian, who kind of compelled his friend, Officer Byam, to come with him to Tahiti and the rest of the mutineers. They spend about a year there in very blissful existence with their new Tahitan wives and kind of just swimming and partying every day, and they start to have children and families there. But around that year mark, they see a British ship coming towards the island. Well, they have just enough time to evacuate because they know if they're caught as mutineers, they'll likely be returned to England and executed. So some of the men opt to go with Fletcher Christian on the Bounty and escape and find their own island with their new families and some other Tahitians, whereas Byam and a group of other men who long to return to England decide to wait for the British ship and roll the dice with them, assuming that they'll be pardoned, as many of them didn't have anything to do with the uprising. Well, Fletcher gets away, but Byam and the other men who opt to stay and wait for the English are brought on board and quickly put into chains. It's clear that Captain Blythe, who is in command of this ship that's arrived, is on a warpath of vengeance, and he wants to get Fletcher Christian and hold him accountable for the mutiny he carried out. So eventually, their ship, as he's searching for Fletcher, gets caught in a storm, shipwrecked, but they manage to get everyone off. Blythe even makes a point of getting the prisoners out of the bottom hold before they drowned, only to bring them back to England and to put them on trial. During the trial, Blythe is presenting his own version of events. He says he has no idea why the mutiny was carried out. Well, because Byam and the others aren't really given the chance to give a fair account of their events, although they give it their best shot, the Admiralty does end up siding with Blythe and sentencing them all to death. But his family is well off and they have a connection to the king. They're able to get a pardon for him, and he does dodge execution and actually is able to rejoin the Navy And William Blythe is kind of denied his moment in the sun. He goes up to an admiral after the trial, says, "Good trial, you delivered justice." But the admiral says, "I commend you for surviving that terrible escapade on that small boat. But in so many words, as for my judgment of you as a man and as a leader, it is very low." Because it's been clear to everyone who got the chance to hear Byam speak in the court that Blythe was really kind of a monster. Well, before the movie ends, we get to see that Fletcher and his crew of mutineers and Tahitians have found their own island, Pitcairn Island, in the middle of the Pacific. The reason they choose that island is there's no safe harbor for a large boat to dock, so they opt to crash the Bounty onto the rocks there, burn it, and make a new life with their mixed families, kind of secluded from the world and in hiding from British justice. So a long movie, but one that obviously had a big impact with it having been remade so many times, and one that is based on a true story. Although there are some historical inaccuracies in the movie, broadly speaking, it is how it unfolded. And very interestingly, the descendants of the mutineers and their Tahitian friends still live on Pitcairn Island. It's a very isolated community. I will say genetically not very diverse this many centuries later. But what did you guys think about Mutiny on the Bounty?
It was a good movie. I'm not going to say it wasn't. It didn't hook me, I guess, the same way Captain Blood did, but I guess because the tones were different. Like, it was definitely an adventure, but more serious in tone. I did like the story, though. I thought, like, with not having any background and knowing that, like, the actual story, it was still a really good movie. I just wish it held my attention a little bit more. There was a part in actually the climax of the film where I did end up falling asleep for a little bit. I don't know if it's because I'm physically tired because I didn't sleep well, or if it was because of the movie. But
it wouldn't be a year in Lights, Camera, Accolade if Chris Antha didn't fall asleep during at least one movie.
I did like the ending. Like, I guess it was kind of a happy ending to a certain degree, and I'm curious to hear Jake's perspective because he actually knows the history behind this. But like I said, I enjoyed the movie. It just didn't grip me the same way. I thought it was going to be kind of like a similar kind of like pirate adventure, and it was, but it was just different. And maybe that's my fault. I put like different expectations on it.
I feel like the primary difference, right, is that Captain Blood got to be a full pirate adventure with all the romanticism that comes with that, versus this was about British Navy. So it's kind of like they're going to be more, not uptight necessarily, but way more rules, less adventure. So for me, I actually really liked it because I think it leaned more heavily into the drama aspects of that head-butting under a rigid power structure where everyone's lives kind of depend on each other, but leadership and the quality of leadership becomes very important. And obviously in this movie, like right off the bat, Charles Laughton was shown to be an overly harsh leader. So I was ready for mutiny 5 minutes in. You know, I
should know that Sarah would not make a good soldier, I don't think, because the movie started and she's already saying to throw the captain overboard immediately.
Well, it's understandable. He was a dick, so.
He was like our first introduction of him, kind of similar to his role in Les Mis, where Javert is very like, here are the rules, we're by the book, this is what it says as punishment for whatever. So with that, it kind of opens with the scene where, one of the sailors had struck a superior officer or something, and so he's sentenced to like 400 lashes. And so after however many, it's clear that the guy is dead. And they're like, okay, so should we dismiss the men who are here to do the lashing? And Charles Laughton is like, nope, we said 400. We're going to do 400. So again, at that point where I don't even know if they'd left port yet, I was like, nope. I'm off.
They hadn't even left yet. They were barely going to start leaving.
Not getting on this boat.
Exactly. No, at that point, I'd be like, look, either we're all throwing him overboard or I'm swimming back to shore and like taking my chances. I don't know.
But that was such a good scene, though.
Yeah.
Like to set the tone for him, just be like, oh, okay, we're in for a ride with this one.
And especially because, it's a 2-year journey. So you're like, oh no, this is not going to be a pleasant 2 years for anyone. Mm-hmm. The only thing with Javert and Les Mis, right? He was by the books, but he was also by the books for himself. Whereas in this movie, there's kind of a scene where they talk about missing cheese, and it becomes overall pretty clear that he's the one who took it for himself, potentially, even though
Heavily
he's
implied.
like blaming it. Yeah, it's heavily implied, but I don't know. That implication of not necessarily holding himself to the same standards that he holds all the other men, which I think is also true in other ways in the movie where they have the better food, you know, X, Y, and Z. So made me not really as sympathetic towards him as I might have been with like Javert and Les Mis, even though the scene where he navigates them back through unimaginable odds and everything in the other ship was very good and very powerful. And it's like, see, if he had this leadership the whole time, like they probably wouldn't have mutinied, you know?
They would have respected him more.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, in that scene, too, he was, I mean, obviously kind of cutthroat, but he wasn't cruel. And
Right.
I feel like he should have been like that since the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I did think it was powerful that the movie showed him shift gears once the tables were turned and he was in a desperate situation with this small group of men. Not to excuse what was patently sadistic behavior up to that point. I think we can all agree he was not somebody probably that personally should have been in command of anybody. But having said that, I think we're led to believe that through his career, he's been through a lot of shit. And he even says he's a self-made man, which was unique to the British Navy as an institution. Most people will know that pre-modern England was very class-based, and even into the modern era, very hierarchical, not a lot of social mobility in most cases. But the British Navy, part of what made it so efficient globally, part of what allowed them to rule the world for a couple hundred years, is the fact that they were meritocratic. And you could start out as a ruffian or a lower class guy, but if you were really qualified and you put your years in, you could ascend to the top or close to it. So his character is an interesting example of that in a way, but it's also a cautionary tale of taking that too far that, you know, eventually it becomes an unmanageable situation and order breaks down and the implications of that.
Mm-hmm. I think the other part that, so everyone's performances were very, very good in this movie. The other reason I think I like this is, to me, there was a little bit of a romance subplot. the chemistry between Clark Gable and Franchot Tone, I don't know. Obviously, it was just a very good kind of friendship and admiration there. But this was another movie that had a very good like score throughout it. And often they'd be using romantic music. I don't know. I was just like, okay, I see it. But apparently kind of disappointed to find out that the director specifically cast Clark Gable and Charles Laughton, hoping that there would be natural tension between the two, because apparently Clark Gable was pretty known at this point as being homophobic. And and so they did not really get along on set. You can't have any good
Sarah's
old-timey
crush
actors.
Clark Gable. Not perfect after all.
I know, so sad.
There was
no
also
one's
like
perfect, right? No one's perfect.
more tension because I was reading too that Clark Gable and Franchot Tone, they were considered like rivals because they were fighting for the affections of Joan Crawford when they were filming Dancing Lady in 1933. But they ended up, I guess, becoming friends because they would go out. They found a connection, a shared interest of drinking and women. And so that tension ended up going away. And so maybe that's some of the on-screen chemistry you were seeing during the movie.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think it was ironic because I was like, the best chemistry in this movie is between you two. Maybe he's judging Charles Laughton because he's, you know, it's that self-hatred.
Maybe.
I don't know.
There's a lot of wishful thinking going on, Sarah, but that would add a very interesting element to the movie. But yeah, when they're on the island and everybody's got their shirts off and they're wearing the native diaper things and everybody's looking good on the beach.
Just like,
it's like
they're just lying down in the sand together, eating bananas,
what happens
just
in
chilling.
Tahiti
You know, just like
stays in Tahiti.
okay. Apparently, also this was the same director. It was Frank Lloyd who directed Cavalcade. So to me, this was also just a much better movie in terms of pacing and direction and all sorts of things. I don't know anything about the history and I haven't watched any of the remakes, so I was just like, when is the mutiny gonna happen? Because it could happen at any point, because at every turn Captain Bligh is doing some stuff where I'm just like, now's the time, guys. You know, let's rise up. So yeah, I was into it, but I do kind of agree, weirdly enough, once the British do come back to find the people who had mutinied and then the court scenes and everything, I wasn't quite as invested in that anymore. And I think a big part of that is because at that point, it's really about French Otone. Was it Byam?
Which is a
Byam.
fictional, it's
Byam.
based on a real guy, but they changed the name. No idea why.
Okay, so in this movie, like his character, right? It's supposed to be like you really caring about his outcome. But I think throughout the whole movie, I was more invested in kind of similar to Les Mis, right? The story about the push and pull between the other two.
Yeah.
So in this case, it was, Captain Bligh and Fletcher Christian, and in Les Mis between Valjean and Javert. Whereas I just didn't really care as much about that secondary, kind of like more innocent person.
Yeah.
That's a
I'm
good
just
call
like,
out because, now that you put it into perspective, I think maybe that's why I lost a little bit of interest too. Because the whole movie, it's this tension between Clark Gable's character and Charles Laughton's character. And then, Clark Gable ends up finding his own happy ending and stuff. But at the end, like, it's kind of like a shift where, okay, we spent all this time watching these two characters battle it out, I guess, between different leadership styles. And then all of a sudden, now the spotlight is on Roger Byam. And it's kind of like, well, he was kind of secondary for most of the time.
Right.
And
I think he's supposed to be like the audience stand-in or the audience's view, kind of navigating the two extremes and then making his
that's
moral
true.
case at the end. But yeah, it's less interesting than the other because the other two are so dynamic in terms of their characters and delivery and personalities.
And even just, I think, the performances. Apparently, Wallace Beery was initially supposed to be Captain Bligh, and I'm so
Interesting.
glad that it was Charles Laughton instead.
Well, I like Lawton a lot, but I'm not gonna don't ask me to choose between my daddies here.
It's an easy choice. It's an easy choice.
I think they're both good, unless you're talking about Pancho Villa, in which case I think that was miscast.
Yeah.
All three of these guys were nominated for Best Actor, which is I believe the reason why they had to introduce Best Supporting Actor category next year.
Yep, exactly. So 9th Oscars will finally get Best Supporting, but that's crazy that all three were nominated. None of them won. They all lost to The Informer, Victor McLaglen. I do kind of wonder if, because I've heard of this sort of thing happening in general with Academy voting, is having people nominated for the same movie kind of splits the vote
Right.
in a weird way, where now it's just like, okay, well, someone from this probably would have won if only one had been nominated.
Yeah.
But
Now they strategize about it like while the movie's in pre-production, if they flag it as like an Oscar bait movie. So you see a lot of like category fraud in terms of like this person should have been Best Main Actor, but they're in the Supporting Actor category, vice versa.
well, I'm glad you brought that up, because even back then at this point, literally the actress who won Best Actress this year was Betty Davis, who I've always pronounced Bet Davis because of the way that it's spelled. But I found out that she pronounced it Betty, and I was like,
I think
well,
I
why'd you
heard
spell
you
it that
say
way?
that on a
Why'd you
previous
confuse everyone?
episode, and I just like let it slide. I was like,
I didn't know
People are
because
gonna
I
laugh
wasn't
at Sarah.
familiar with her. I know, they're like, Sarah's wrong. She spells it like bet. Okay. And there was an interview with her way later in her life when she was like in her 80s, being like, yeah, Bette. Like, yes, it should be pronounced bet, but it's not. So she admitted it. Whatever.
you're not wrong.
But
Yeah.
Betty Davis. Yeah, exactly. I'm not wrong. She was wrong 90 years ago. But anyway, so I guess the previous year she was in a movie. I wish I had the titles. I should have had like better notes on this. But in the 7th year, everyone kind of agreed that she should have won Best Actress. And because she didn't win, and there was still some sort of like outcry about like, no, her performance was very, very good, then they kind of gave her the consolation win this year.
Really fair to the other actors that year.
Yeah, it's not really fair to anyone. So like consolation prizes like that. Who's like a good actor who's had like a really good movie and then a really
DiCaprio
terrible movie?
winning for The Revenant when he probably should have won for several other things.
Yeah. So that's sort of exactly where it's kind of just like, okay, we recognize that you are a great actor or actress, and we just haven't given you an award yet. So here you go.
happens.
She also, calling the statuette of the Academy Award for like Best Picture, all of that, the Oscar, officially started happening this year. And through some research, it's unclear where that came from. But one of the people who claims to have kind of started that trend is actually Betty Davis. And because her husband's middle name is Oscar, and allegedly her story is when she looked at the statuette, his butt kind of looked like her husband's butt. And so she just started calling him Oscar, the statue, and it kind of caught on. This has been contested by several people, but I did actually find a clip. I don't have the link right now, but I will share it with you guys. But there's a clip on YouTube, if you look it up, where it's just her and Victor McLaglen kind of chatting back and forth while people are taking pictures of them after they've won the Oscar. And you can hear her, calling him like little Oscar and being like, oh, that's my husband's, middle name, etc. So I'm like, I think she was telling the truth.
Plausible.
I think she named it the Oscar. And that's my story now. So apologies for having mispronounced her name, but eventually maybe we'll actually see her in a movie.
Well, I was going to say, if you know Betty Davis and the history of her life, I can imagine her manufacturing a story like that. But also, I want to believe that story, especially if you found evidence of it. I think that's a cute origin story, but I imagine maybe the Academy wanting to cover up they're like, no, it was named after a very renowned European director.
Yeah, several people had different stories. And it's possible that it just so happened that whoever had started it or whatever the root cause, like this was the year it started being called Oscar, and she just made that connection when she won hers anyway. But I don't know, like it's the year it started happening. I heard her on film.
Sounds good to me. Can't believe we hadn't come across, like, now that I think about it, what was the origin of that name? So thank you for that. But what did you guys think about the portrayal of the native Tahitian? I might not be nailing that. But what did you guys think of the portrayal of that population? Because it's been kind of a mixed bag so far for that kind of topic with the movies we've watched.
I appreciated that there wasn't like painted white people,
Yeah, just brown face completely.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I looked into it, and I think she was the one who played Christian Fletcher's girlfriend/wife. She became Marlon Brando's second wife, and she's a Mexican-American actress. But it didn't last long. And when Marlon Brando played the remake of this movie in 1962, he ended up marrying the co-star in that year.
Two
and then
different Tahitian women. Or this actress wasn't Tahitian.
No,
saying.
She's not. She's a Mexican American. But she played a lot of exotic women.
Yes. So she was the one, Marlon Brando's wife. She was the one who had a crush on French Show's character. The one who married Clark Gable's character in this was Hawaiian, which is like, that's at least
a little closer.
It's a little closer, just a little bit. But it seems like, no, the rest of everyone, it kind of reminded me of the luau sequence in, was it Flirtation Walk?
Yes.
Okay. It was cool to see some of the celebration stuff. The only thing that kind of made me squint a little bit is that I feel like the women were much more treated as like, look at how free and wild they are, sort of thing.
It's kind of a male fantasy gaze to it.
I think there is a lot of truth to not every culture having the same sort of stiffness around sexuality or all other sorts of things, especially when compared to the British. But whenever like a movie treats native women especially like that, I'm just like, what narrative are you trying to tell here? Objectifying and kind of othering them in a not fetishizing way, but kind of in that space.
Well, I think it's a male fantasy like environment, and it's meant to be that extreme contrast to the environment of the ship, because like, let's be honest, it was not a fun job to have. I mean, you're locked in this dank, constantly wet, smelly, hot hunk of wood for months and months, if not years at a time, eating maggoty bread and just working every day. They'd have you clean the whole ship every day, getting barely enough food and nutrients to survive, sunburnt to all hell. So if you're going through that, and if you're living under a real tyrant like Blythe, I think it must have felt like discovering heaven on earth when they got to Tahiti. So you can understand why they would want to stay there. But like you're saying, I wonder, this is a good segue to talk a little bit about some of the deviation from the history because the men that Fletcher and his other surviving mutineers took with them and their women, the Tahitian men, they were enslaved by them. It wasn't necessarily like an egalitarian
Mm-hmm.
situation.
Jeez.
They very
Okay.
much introduced certain British values about property and ownership, including that of human beings. So, the movie kind of whitewashes their treatment to the
Mm-hmm.
natives and the idyllic nature of it, but still interesting. I think in comparison to some, like I'm thinking about Trader Horn and things of that nature,
Mm-hmm.
this is definitely an improvement to
For
some
sure.
extent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I don't think we've mentioned, I think all of the ship sequences were very impressive, both like the shots that they had of actually sailing, but even just the scale of, like, I'm pretty sure these were actual
Looked
ships
like
that
it.
were built.
Yeah.
So just like really impressive, helped with
Yeah.
immersion.
Yeah. It definitely felt like a best picture
Mhm.
design.
Especially the sequences with the storm.
Yeah, with the storm. Like I felt stressed and it made me just be like, yeah, I'm never going on a long voyage. Like that ain't me.
Yeah.
Oh, I just think it's worth noting how neat and interesting it is that the inhabitants of Pitcairn Island are still extant and still descended directly from the mutineers. I watched a little mini documentary about this story a couple years ago, and they talk about how shortly after they arrived on the island, there was some kind of crisis or almost like mini war that nobody knows quite what happened. But essentially, the biological lines of only, I think, two or three of the mutineers survived. And
Mm.
those several families have survived there for like 250 years, just like intermarrying amongst each other. And now they get like supply ships like once or twice a year. But just kind of a neat little message in a bottle from the past almost still in existence on that island.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Well, out of all of the movies we watched this year, which ones do you guys think are still worth watching today?
I would say definitely Les Mis, just because I feel like it's a classic and there's been a couple of remakes. So I definitely think that one's worth watching. I really enjoyed it and I am looking forward to watching the others. I don't know if the musical one got nominated or.
I think it did.
Okay,
I think
so
it
then
did.
I'll have to wait till we get to that point.
You don't have to wait, but yeah.
And then I liked Top Hat. I thought it was a good, lighthearted film. Like I would definitely go back and watch it. And like I said, I liked the dance sequences and the humor. I feel like it's one of those movies when you watch a movie and they always have like some old, school black and white, either cartoon or film playing in the background. You would be like that character in that movie. And they'd be like, wow, you're so niche. You're watching something from the 1930s. But yeah, I did like Top Hat for something lighthearted. And then I would say A Midsummer Night's Dream is worth watching for the visuals and just like the awe of it and like all the work that went into creating that story and bringing it to life. And like I said, Captain Blood, I really did like that. If you're a fan of, adventure, pirate stuff, just you would have to forget everything that you heard about Harold Flynn. But I did really enjoy that movie, and I feel like it's worth watching, especially seeing the similarities between Pirates of the Caribbean, because there's a few things in there where, like, even when I was watching, I was like, oh, that comes out in the movie. Obviously, I feel like when you have a trope, it kind of pops up everywhere. But I would say Captain Blood, and then, yeah, definitely Mutiny on the Bounty, I feel is another one that's worth watching. It is a good movie. Just feel like you have to be maybe in the right headspace for it. I don't feel like you have to know the history behind it, but it'd be cool too, just to see, like if you are a history buff, just to see how accurate or inaccurate it is or something like that. But I do think Mutiny on the Bounty is worth.
Can't argue with the points you made, although my taste might be a little bit different. But I just want to start off by saying, to be honest with you guys, and I'm sorry, Abby, I know she's going to keep up and watch a lot of these on her own time. I think this was the strongest year for movies we've had so far.
Yes, I agree.
Usually there's more movies that I wouldn't. Well, actually, no, I'm kind of an outlier because I'm pretty positive about movies. But I feel like there's fewer this year that I'm like making excuses for in my mind. I really thoroughly enjoyed most of the movies I watched this year. I'll just run down the ones that really stood out and that I would recommend most strongly. And that would be Naughty Marietta. For whatever reason, this musical is like changing my opinion on musicals. I had such a good time watching that. I thought the humor was great. It was just an uplifting story, and you could really see the chemistry between those two leads. And knowing what we know now about how they really loved each other in real life, that bled through to me. The Ruggles of Red Gap, probably the most fun I had in terms of watching a movie this year. This is Charles Laughton, in my mind, at his best, getting to be British, getting to have his existential crisis, but ultimately being a fish out of water in a new environment and making me look at, the whole American experience a little bit differently. Obviously, we all know problematic elements to that, but Ruggles really reminded us in his speech of some of the good things about it. Les Mis was good to see the whole thing all the way through for the first time. The rivalry between Jean Valjean and Jafar was really interesting. Jafar, sorry. Informer, I think, was the most modern movie we've seen so far. I thought it was beautifully filmed in terms of what Ford did with the lighting and the staging, and just cool to see a descent into self-destruction. So love that. I liked Alice Adams. I know you guys are a bit more lukewarm on it. I think Katharine Hepburn is so charismatic, and I kind of would watch her in anything, to be honest. I agree with some of the gripes and points you made about the story, but overall, I enjoyed it. Really had a good time with Broadway Melody of 1936. I don't know why. Again, I'm softening on musicals this year. Was impressed by the staging on those rooftop dance sequences. Really cool. The main girl was super hot, and those punches were hilarious to me. I'm still laughing at those. I'm just not a Shakespeare guy, but visually, you know what? If you have a penchant for marijuana, like light up one and watch Midsummer Night's Dream, because it is trippy as hell. And I'm still kind of trying to figure out some of the details of that story, but thank you, Sarah, for explaining it. Like Crescenta said, Captain Blood was great fun. White slavery is not real. I think it's really important to remind everybody that, because there's people trying to say that it still exists in South Africa now, whatever the hell's going on, but forget about that. Just suspend your disbelief and get on board with a really hot, problematic doctor, captain, sexual demigod. He's hitting all the marks, and it's a fun time. Mutiny on the Bounty, I loved it. I thought it was super interesting. It was maybe a little long, but I'm a history guy, so it was cool to see the history of a really interesting historical event. Yeah, it was great. Great performances all around in that one.
I feel like this is kind of similar to other years for me, actually, where there were a few standouts, and the rest I could kind of take or leave. But I do agree that the quality overall has improved. So even on the ones that I'm kind of lukewarm on, I recognize that they're still solid. But I think for me, Ruggles of Red Gap was a really fun time. So I think if you just want to see Charles Laughton's performance, definitely a fun one. But even with that one, I'd say if you're specifically looking for an older movie, you want to see Charles Laughton in a more comedic role, but still kind of heartwarming. That one was good. Les Mis, I think, kind of had my issues with certain pacing things, particularly, again, as we mentioned, when it starts focusing on Cosette, but really thought Frederick March and Charles Laughton, their performances were really, really good. So that's a good adaptation, especially if you do like that story and you've never seen it. I think it's worth going back for. Man, The Informer, I'm back and forth on, because I do think beautiful movie, when viewed abstractly, sure, but when I was watching it, it was just a lot of it's this guy, clearly it's this guy. So I think that I would recommend specifically for people who might really be into cinematography and lighting and set design, definitely go back and watch that one. If you're watching more for just the story and everything, maybe not as much. Top Hat, I think go back and watch some of the dancing sequences, particularly Cheek to Cheek with Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire. Absolutely worth watching that segment of the movie. it is a fun time. So I kind of agree with Chrysantha, can totally see the vibes of like, oh, you have Top Hat playing on in the background. You must be like very quirky. But like, it's a fun one.
Top Hat hipsters. Damn.
Yeah, Top Hat hipsters. A Midsummer Night's Dream, especially if you love Shakespeare, worth watching. I loved it. Like, I thought it was such a good time. Not only was it very just like visually lush, but it was just really ridiculous, really fun. Just the most beautiful fever dream with the most annoying little imp of Mickey Rooney, where you're just like, he just is ruining everything. But was a great time. I think very, very fun, especially once you kind of know what the general premise is and can just kind of relax and watch the chaos unfold in that old Hollywood glamour sort of way. I loved it. I truly loved A Midsummer Night's Dream. I think it might have actually been my favorite that we watched this year.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I'm going to skip over Captain Blood. I know you guys are going to hate me for this, but like, I think it was good. You know, it just didn't really grip me the same way.
He's a pedophile now, and
no, oh my God, no, no, it has nothing to do with Errol Flynn. I think just in general, I don't know what it was. It just didn't really grip me, but I'm glad that it did for you guys. Mutiny on the Bounty, I would definitely also recommend. I think it's a very good drama, very good performances, looks beautiful, maybe a little bit overly long, but I really enjoyed that one for sure. Now comes potentially the tougher question of, do we think that Mutiny on the Bounty deserved the win?
Such a weird way to frame it. I don't know if deserve enters into it, but this year I'm taking a stand. I'm doing what I like. Ruggles was so much fun. I love Ruggles. It just, for me, it had everything. It was like, I don't know. I was laughing the whole time. And I know traditionally best pictures aren't like comedies, but I feel like this Ruggles had enough drama and Ruggles changed and evolved enough over the course of the movie that it deserves it. And the reason also I'm saying it is this was the year of Charles Laughton. And while I do agree that the lead actor in Former was fantastic, especially now that you've explained what he went through to deliver that performance, I want Laughton to get, although Laughton was a star in the one that won anyway. So
he was. Yeah.
He wins either way. But I think he really got to shine in Ruggles. So Ruggles is my pick for Best Picture.
And at least in Ruggles, you're on his side, you know? Like, we love Ruggles. Yeah, I guess maybe a better way to frame it is, if you were an Academy member, which would you have voted for?
As a Bengal Lancer. No.
Yeah, that's Chrysantha's pick.
Oh, God.
What do you think, Chrysantha?
I think Mutiny. I think I would have chosen Mutiny. I mean, I don't know, because I'd be torn, because like I really was impressed with A Midsummer Night's Dream. Like I really was, and so I think
wish I'd
like
watched that one with you guys. You would have helped me understand it.
Yeah, it's just like, because the visuals were so beautiful, and like I feel like the people who had to create the set probably had to get very creative with creating this world. And then from what Sarah had told me, like with that the play in general, like it's a very convoluted play already with different storylines kind of happening. And so I feel like having to have that translation on the big screen, like I just feel like it was just complex and beautiful. But then at the same time, Mutiny on the Bounty was also a really good movie too. Like it dealt with very strong plots, and I feel like the acting in that movie was really good. Not saying that the acting in A Midsummer Night's Dream wasn't good, it was, but I'm torn. But I'm kind of leaning more towards A Midsummer Night's Dream, and that's pretty big, because like I said before, like when it comes to Shakespeare, like it was always really hard for me to get on board, mainly because like I struggled with the language. But I really enjoyed A Midsummer Night's Dream. Like everything, the visuals, I think probably took a big chunk of that, but I think I probably would have wrote that in for my ballot.
So those are the two I'm in between also. For basically all of the same reasons. And it's kind of stressing me out. I'm kind of laughing because it's reminding me of the year that Shakespeare in Love won over like other movies that year, but particularly Saving Private Ryan. Like was the one.
That's kind of a good parallel.
Exactly. This feels very much like we're the Academy potentially choosing a Shakespeare light comedy adaptation over like a much more dramatic, like grittier, similarly big budget movie.
Oh, I thought you meant you were between Midsummer Night and Ruggles. Never mind.
Oh, no.
She's like,
Jake's
no,
like,
fuck
yeah,
Ruggles.
Call
No,
Abby.
who gives a shit about
Get
Ruggles?
Abby on the phone.
Yeah. No. Between Mutiny on the Bounty and A Midsummer Night's Dream. Both movies looked great. They sounded great. And for me, it's now just kind of trying to choose between what I felt was like a good drama with good acting or a very successful, fun, visually beautiful adaptation of just like a really silly play, right? At the end of the day. This is hard. Midsummer Night's Dream or Mutiny on the Bounty? I think I'm going to have to go with A Midsummer Night's Dream also. Just, it was very different, very enjoyable. I think we're going to continue seeing really, really great dramas throughout, and those are usually what I lean towards. So I think it is special enough for just like some silly, ridiculous movie to be good enough in my mind to be like, no, this beats out a lot of the kind of more dramatic or significant feeling movies. So yeah, I think I'm going to go A Midsummer Night's Dream also.
Good choice.
Fair
Good
enough.
choice.
I think everybody defended their arguments very well. I will say The Informer is also on my radar, but I just had so much fun with Ruggles.
I think that's fair. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us for the 8th year of the Academy Awards. We look forward to the next year where we get a fewer nominees, which will be a little bit nice. So 9 nominees, 1 winner. Thank you. Just a couple movies less. And just looking forward, because I know we also have Paul Mooney, and I saw Norma Shearer is playing the lead in one of them too. So I feel like it's going to be a good year. I feel
like we're assembling a superhero team.
Yeah, we should do like a poll at some point or something with like all of our favorites that we've discovered through this, who I would have never known about, if not going back and watching all of these. So it's been a fun adventure. But for the 9th Academy Awards, the movies that were nominated, we have Anthony Adverse, Dodsworth, Libeled Lady, Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, Romeo and Juliet, San Francisco, The Story of Louis Pasteur, A Tale of Two Cities, Three Smart Girls, and The Great Ziegfeld. I don't know how to pronounce that. But looking forward to it and hoping you'll join us for the next one.
Bye.
Goodbye. Hope you enjoyed the episode.
or like in the movie in Mutiny and the Bounty, when he's like, "Goodbye, my love. I'll be back to you. Goodbye."
Bye.